Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. I've always been a sucker for storage auctions. Not because I think I'll find gold bars or rare antiques, though yeah, that's always the dream, but because I like the idea of discovering pieces of someone's life. There's something weirdly voyeuristic about it, like flipping through the pages of a stranger's diary, except the diary is filled with old clothes, dusty furniture, forgotten tools, and sometimes things that make your stomach twist with the knowledge that someone left them behind on purpose. I've been doing this for a few years now, flipping the good stuff on eBay or at local flea markets, sometimes holding on to weird knickknacks just because they're too interesting to let go. That's how I ended up at the auction on the edge of town, in a storage facility that hadn't had a single unit open up in months. The place looked like it had been swallowed by the weeds, tucked between a railroad and an overgrown patch of forest, the kind of place people forget even exists. There were only 5 of us bidding that day, mostly regulars, and I wasn't expecting much. Most of the units were just clutter, moldy mattresses, warped furniture, old VHS tapes. But then they opened unit number 119, and everything stopped. Even the auctioneer paused for a moment, like he wasn't sure he should be showing it. The front was packed, almost floor to ceiling, but not with trash. There were old filing cabinets, several plastic bins stacked meticulously, a beat-up love seat, and a massive industrial shelf filled with sealed cardboard boxes labeled only by dates in thick Sharpie. No names, no categories, just years: 1993, 1997, 2002, and so on. I don't know what got into me, but I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It was like the air shifted when that door rolled up. I remember looking around, seeing the other bidders shake their heads, uninterested in something that looked more like a hoarder's archive than a jackpot. When the auctioneer called for bids, I raised my hand. Nobody else did. I won the unit for $35. I brought a flashlight, bolt cutters, and gloves the next day, figuring I'd spend a few hours sorting things and hauling out whatever I could flip or toss. The air inside the unit was stale, like it had been sealed for years. Not musty exactly, but sterile and heavy, like an old hospital. That's the first thing that set me off. The second was how meticulously everything was arranged. The boxes weren't just stacked. They were ordered by year, lined up like a timeline. The filing cabinets were labeled alphabetically, and inside were manila folders stuffed with what looked like medical records. Dozens and dozens of them, maybe hundreds. But they weren't from any hospital I'd heard of. They were printed with a logo I didn't recognize. A small red cross inside a triangle. No name. Most of the documents were case reports, handwritten notes in cramped, slanted writing, Polaroids paper-clipped to some of the pages. A few folders had newspaper clippings about missing people, with little annotations scribbled in the margins. I tried to convince myself it was just some eccentric collector, maybe someone obsessed with cold cases building their own archive. But when I opened one box marked 1997, I found something I still have trouble believing: a large Ziploc bag containing a necklace, a stained piece of cloth, and a photo of a girl in her early 20s, smiling with braces and sunburnt cheeks. The back of the photo had a name: Rachel H. Last seen August 12, 97, Rockland Creek Trail. My stomach turned. I remembered that name. I was a kid when she went missing. It was one of those cases the local news wouldn't let go for months. Search parties, interviews with the family, rumors that she was seen hitchhiking miles away. But she was never found. The thing that truly made my hands shake, though, was the object wrapped in newspaper in the bottom of the box. A small silver audio recorder, the kind therapists or detectives use. I pressed play. Static first. Then a woman's voice, strained and scared. "If someone finds this, I didn't get lost. He took me. He watches us from the trees. Don't trust." Then nothing. I nearly dropped it. I didn't know what to do. The police? Maybe. But what if I'd found someone's twisted novel project? People build creepy sets in their garages all the time, make fake crime scenes. But deep down, I knew this wasn't fiction. And I hadn't even opened the locked metal box I found in the back corner yet. The one with a broken handle and heavy-duty latches that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. It had no markings, no keyhole I could see. Just rust and weight and a faint smell of something chemical, metallic, and wrong. I should have left it. I should have walked away and never gone back. But I didn't. I took it home with me, set it in my garage, and tried not to look at it for 2 full days. Then I pried it open with a crowbar. It was around midnight when I finally worked up the nerve to open the box. I don't know why I chose that hour. Maybe I thought it would feel less real in the dark, like the shadows would dull whatever I found inside. Maybe I was just afraid of someone seeing what I was about to uncover. Like some part of me knew that this wasn't meant for the world outside that rusted storage unit. The box groaned as I wedged the crowbar under the latch and pried it open, metal screeching in protest. A sharp scent hit me immediately. Not rot exactly, but something sterile and burnt, like singed plastic or formaldehyde. Inside, under layers of decaying foam and black plastic wrap, were rows of vacuum-sealed bags, each one containing what looked like evidence. Hairbrushes, shoes, wallets, pieces of clothing with crusted stains that looked too dark to be wine or dirt. Some of them had labels, names, dates, locations. Others were completely anonymous. I picked up one of the bags and saw a child's sneaker, impossibly small, with a faded cartoon character on the side and a scrap of masking tape stuck to the plastic. 6B. That was it. No name, just a code. Underneath the bags, wrapped tightly in butcher paper and bound with electrical tape, was a journal. I had to slice the tape off with a utility knife, my hands trembling the entire time. The cover was leather, stained and cracked, with that same red cross in a triangle symbol embossed on the front. Inside were pages upon pages of tiny, scribbled writing, diagrams, anatomical sketches, and crude maps. There were references to the protocol and something called Subject Harvesting Phase B. It read like the ravings of a madman, but certain words kept repeating: collection, preservation, specimen compliance, and extraction site viability. I flipped to the middle of the book and found something that stopped my heart cold. It was a hand-drawn map of the area near my town, specifically the forest behind the old Rockland Creek Trail, where that girl Rachel H. had vanished back in '97. The map was marked with X's, and each one had a date beside it, spanning decades. The journal detailed methods of approach, behavioral notes, and what I swear were post-mortem observations. Whoever wrote this hadn't just fantasized about hurting people. They had done it, and they had kept notes. Detailed notes. And if this was real, if these artifacts were genuine, then I wasn't just holding on to some sick bastard scrapbook. I was holding evidence. Evidence that could crack open disappearances the police had long since given up on. I sat there for hours, reading through the journal, my stomach lurching at the descriptions of abductions, the way the writer dehumanized the victims, referring to them as volumes and cells. I found references to at least 15 different victims, all matching the ages and dates of real missing persons I vaguely remembered hearing about. Stories from local news, grainy flyers pinned to grocery store boards when I was a teenager, names whispered in hushed voices at bars when people talked about those poor kids who never came back. I wanted to call the police. God, I wanted to, but some sick part of me also didn't want to let it go yet. I needed to know more. I needed to know who had done this. I needed to know where they were now. And most terrifying of all, I needed to know if they were still out there. I didn't sleep the night I opened that box. I sat in my garage with the journal open across my lap, the plastic evidence bags spread out on the concrete like puzzle pieces in some grotesque crime scene reenactment, lit by the buzzing overhead light that flickered every few minutes. My mind was spiraling, questions bleeding into each other, one after the other like a chorus I couldn't quiet. Who owned this unit? Why was this information here and not in police custody? Who wrote this journal? And the worst of them all, was the killer still alive? Still active? I knew I was in too deep already, but that part of me that had always chased after strange things, the part that haunted flea markets and storage lockers and dusty estate sales, had finally found something that felt like it wasn't supposed to be found. And now I was part of it. I didn't go to the police, not at first. Couldn't. I was afraid. Not just of not being believed, but of having everything confiscated, locked behind red tape and bureaucracy, turned into evidence while the truth slipped through my fingers again. I convinced myself it was better if I dug deeper first, just a little further. So I took photos of everything, every note, every bag, every page of the journal, and started cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. That's when things got worse, much worse, because it matched too well. The name T. Calloway, November 8th, 1989, mile 7.5, subject uncooperative, scrawled into the margin of a journal page matched a 1989 missing persons report for a boy named Thomas Calloway who vanished from a youth hiking trip in the exact area mentioned. The shoe I found in one of the bags, the one labeled 6B, perfectly matched a photo I found online of another child who vanished in 1992. A girl named Lisa Renner, same cartoon character on the shoe, same model. Then I found a passage in the journal describing a failed extraction due to observer interference, March 15th, 2004, subject #11A lost. That date lined up with a report I found from local archives. A man who claimed he saw a hooded figure trying to drag a screaming teenager into the woods near the highway, but the guy fled before police arrived, and the teenager was never identified or found. It was all there, hiding in plain sight, buried in some forgotten unit behind a rusted steel door. But what chilled me to my marrow wasn't just the cold factual consistency. It was the voice in the journal itself. Whoever wrote it didn't think like a normal person. The entries weren't emotional, weren't full of guilt or rage or any recognizable human feeling. They read like lab notes, sterile, dispassionate. Subject demonstrated excessive vocal resistance and was therefore subdued with compound beta 5. Acquisition time, 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Preserved specimen demonstrates viable tissue integrity postmortem at 14-hour mark. Skull contents unstable due to early phase extraction. That wasn't the writing of someone who just enjoyed killing. This was someone who was studying people, breaking them down, recording them like insects in jars. I started seeing the red cross and triangle symbol in my dreams, sometimes carved into trees, sometimes flashing in headlights on a back road I'd never driven before, sometimes burning at the bottom of a black pit I couldn't climb out of. I stopped leaving the house except for gas station coffee and energy drinks. I stopped answering friends. I even called out sick from my actual job 3 days in a row just to stay in my garage and sort the nightmare. I knew I had to find out who had owned the unit, and that meant going back to the storage facility. Something I didn't want to do. But the answer had to be in their records. And it was. Kind of. I drove out there on a rainy afternoon, one of those heavy gray days where it feels like the sky is pressing down on everything. I lied and told the manager I was interested in long-term leasing and casually asked about who owned unit number 119 before me. He said the unit had been under the same name since 1996, a Dr. Elias Warren. I asked if they had forwarding info. He said no. Warren stopped making payments over a year ago, and none of the contact info worked anymore. Mail returned. Phone's dead. No online trail. I left the place with my heart thudding, rain hammering the roof of my car, windshield wipers smearing the world into a gray blur. That name, Elias Warren, gnawed at something in the back of my mind. It sounded familiar. I didn't know why. That night, after digging for hours on public record sites, I found a 1993 newspaper article archived online from a local college's medical research department. Promising neurologist Elias Warren launches independent cognitive study with private funding. No other articles ever mentioned him again. Just that one. After 1993, it was like he vanished. And I realized that was the same year one of the first boxes in the storage unit was labeled 1993. That's when it all began. And I had a feeling that if I didn't stop digging now, I wouldn't like where this trail ended. But by then, it was already too late to stop. I became obsessed. Not the kind of obsession where you lose track of time or skip a few meals. This was deeper. Worse. This was the kind of obsession that crawls into your bones and makes you forget what it means to feel safe. The kind that takes over your sleep and your waking life until you don't know which is which. I started mapping the disappearances myself. Every X in the journal. Every name, every year. I bought a huge county map off eBay and pinned it to my garage wall. Tracing the locations of each missing person I could connect to Elias Warren's notes. And as the pushpins multiplied, a shape began to emerge. Not a perfect circle, not quite a pattern either, but a perimeter, a rough boundary of disappearances spanning over 30 years. The center of that web was Rockland Creek Forest. That place wasn't just a common site for abductions, it was the epicenter, the breathing heart of this entire nightmare. It was where it all started. I stared at that map for days, and then I did something unbelievably stupid. I went there. I told no one. I packed a flashlight, the journal, 3 bottles of water, and a loaded revolver I inherited from my uncle, just in case. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything reckless, that I was just going to walk the main trail and see if anything stood out. That lasted maybe 15 minutes. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. I don't know how to describe it. The woods were too quiet. Not serene, silent. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Just me and the crunch of my boots on the path. Felt like walking into a vacuum. Then I started seeing the signs. Not obvious ones. Subtle things. Carvings on trees, not initials, but symbols. The red triangle with the cross, gouged deep into bark at irregular intervals. Rope fibers buried in the underbrush. Faded pieces of plastic like old trail markers, some with smeared red stains. And then I found the bunker, half buried under moss and brush, at the base of a rocky hill where the trees thinned out just enough to let the gray sky leak through. It wasn't a large structure, maybe the size of a small shed, made of concrete and reinforced metal, with a rusted door sealed shut by a bolt that looked like it hadn't moved since the Clinton administration. But the symbol was there, clear as day, carved into the door, deep, precise, and there were scratch marks near the handle. Long, frantic ones. I didn't go in. I didn't even try. I just stood there, breath shallow, the air around me thick with rot and damp leaves and something else. Something sharp, like ozone before lightning. The place reeked of history and dread. But it was real. The bunker was real. The journal wasn't some elaborate hoax. Warren had been here, or someone had. I turned back fast, stumbling through the forest like something was at my heels, tripping over roots and gasping when branches whipped across my face. I didn't breathe right until I was in my car, doors locked, staring at my own pale reflection in the rearview mirror. Back home, I tried to reorient myself, tried to return to normal life, but everything was infected by the knowledge of what I'd found. My phone would buzz with no caller ID. I'd answer and hear nothing but faint breathing, or silence so deep it made my ears ring. I started seeing a man on the street corners near my house, just watching, always in the same gray coat, face obscured by a cap. He never moved, never came closer, just stood. I'd blink and he'd be gone. Lights in my garage would flicker when I went near the box. My house developed cold spots. I started waking up at 3:17 a.m. every night, like clockwork, to the sound of scratching inside my bedroom walls. The first time I thought it was mice, but then I heard breathing, rhythmic, human. I tore open the drywall 3 nights later. My hands bled from tearing at the panels with a crowbar, drywall dust clogging my throat, heart pounding so loud I couldn't think straight. Behind the wall I found space, more than there should have been. A shallow crawlway that shouldn't have existed in the architecture of my house. It smelled like mildew and iron, and something else. I crawled in. I still don't know why. I brought a flashlight and the gun. The tunnel curved. The insulation was peeled back. At one point, I swear the walls looked scorched, and there were scratches everywhere, deep grooves, human fingernails embedded in the wood. And then I found the nest. That's what it looked like. A pile of blankets, old newspapers, and bones, small animal bones at first, and then one I knew in my gut had to be human. A child's radius, too small for anything else. It was tucked under a moldy stuffed animal. The fur was matted and discolored, and someone had stitched the red triangle symbol into its belly with thick black thread. I dropped the flashlight. It flickered, and for a split second, I saw movement at the end of the tunnel. Something tall, pale, watching. I don't remember crawling out. I don't remember screaming. I remember the cold, the way my teeth rattled. I remember locking every door and pushing my dresser in front of my bedroom entrance. I didn't sleep for the next 3 days. But when I finally passed out, I dreamed of eyes, dozens of them blinking from the trees. I heard whispers in the static of the wind. He never left. I checked the unit records again. I needed to know more about Elias Warren. Dig deeper. Find a next of kin. But something had changed. When I logged into the online records page, the same page I'd used a week ago, the owner of unit number 119 was now listed as unknown data archived. The file had been locked, deleted, scrubbed, and when I called the storage manager to ask, he didn't remember the unit at all. He said there was no unit number 119. He sounded confused, nervous, like he was being watched while he talked. That night, someone broke into my garage. Nothing was stolen, but the box, the one with the journal, the artifacts, everything, had been sealed shut with thick, black duct tape. And someone had carved something into the cement next to it. A symbol, the triangle and the cross. Except this time it was upside down. I didn't leave my house for nearly a week after the symbol appeared in the garage. Not to work, not to eat properly. I sat in front of the sealed box for hours, not daring to touch it again. Unsure if opening it would bring back the answers or unleash something worse. I started hearing things through the vents at night. Not just scratching anymore. Whispers, phrases half-formed, spoken in a child's voice that trembled and cracked like radio static. He's still watching. The woods remember. You open the door. And most often, don't look behind you. The temperature in my house dropped even when the thermostat stayed the same. One morning I woke up with my nose bleeding and a single word scrawled on my bathroom mirror in condensation. Beneath. No one had been in the house. All the windows were locked. I started dreaming about the forest again. Only now I wasn't walking. I was being dragged. Through dirt. Through leaves. My fingernails ripping out one by one as I clutched at roots and rocks. Screaming into silence that swallowed everything. And standing above me, always out of focus, was a figure in a long coat with no face. Only that red triangle burned across its chest, dripping something darker than blood. Eventually I broke. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I had to know more. So I cut open the tape sealing the box again. Slower this time, almost reverently, like I was exhuming a body. At the bottom, beneath the journal and the evidence bags, under a false lining I hadn't noticed before, was a black cloth pouch tied with twine. Inside were 5 cassette tapes, each one labeled with nothing more than a Roman numeral. I didn't own a cassette player, but I found one at a thrift store the next day. When I got home, I shut every blind in the house, turned off every light, and sat cross-legged in front of the player like a kid watching Saturday morning cartoons. Except what I was about to hear wasn't meant for human ears. Tape I started with silence. Then the same voice from the recorder in the first box. Rachel H.'s voice, crying, pleading. Please, I don't know why I'm here. I did what you asked. Please just let me go. Then something else. A male voice, cold and clinical, distorted somehow, like it was being filtered through a metal grate. You are no longer an individual. You are a measurement. You are data point 14. All previous identities have been discarded. She screamed, then static. Tape 2 was worse. Screams, many. Different ages, different genders. Then the voice again, emotionless. The neural compliance rate has dropped. Subject 07 did not respond to cranial saturation. Terminate and preserve. Then a sound that haunts me even now. The wet snap of bone followed by dragging, like something heavy across tile. One of the voices, a child, kept calling for someone named Mommy. It didn't stop until the end. Tape 3 was a recording of a conversation between 2 people. One the same voice from the other tapes, the other unknown. A new one, southern accent, nervous. You said this was just research. The distorted voice answered, it is. Research requires replication. But these are people. Silence. Then, that's the flaw in your thinking. They were people. Now they are material. This is preservation. This is survival. The southern voice whispered something I couldn't understand. The tape ended with the sound of someone vomiting, followed by a single gunshot. Tape 4 was ambient noise for several minutes. Then crying. Deep, guttural, like a man being broken down slowly. Then a humming sound, musical, off-key, and the soft clicking of something metallic. Then a voice, right next to the microphone. If you're hearing this, it's already watching you too. Tape V didn't start at all. The cassette ribbon inside was ripped, knotted in on itself. I tried to fix it, but when I spliced it together and pressed play, all I got was backwards gibberish and strange tones that made my eyes water and my head hurt. I stopped after 20 seconds and threw up in the kitchen sink. I threw the tape in the garbage. But when I woke up the next morning, it was back inside the pouch, perfectly intact, and I couldn't take it anymore. I took the tapes, the journal, the artifacts, everything, and drove to the sheriff's office on a Thursday morning under a pale yellow sky. I met with a detective named Rhodes, middle-aged, skeptical, worn around the eyes like someone who'd seen too many cases with no closure. I dumped the evidence on the table, handed him a printed spreadsheet of every victim, every date, every journal passage I could cross-reference, and asked him one question. "Do you believe in evil that doesn't die?" At first, he looked at me like I was insane, but by the time he'd flipped through half the pages, his face changed. He turned pale, quiet. He said he remembered Rachel H. He said he was only a deputy back then, fresh on the force. He said they searched for months, and that the girl's mother still called every year on her birthday asking if there were new leads. I left everything with him. I gave my statement. I even agreed to let them examine the crawl space. But I never heard back. Not officially. I tried calling Rhodes 3 times. His desk phone went straight to voicemail. Then I read the paper 5 days later. Detective Thomas Rhodes found dead in apparent suicide, gunshot wound in basement office. No foul play suspected. But the photo in the article showed something I couldn't ignore. In the background of the crime scene, just barely visible on the wall behind his desk, was a symbol drawn in red ink, a triangle with a cross, upside down. That night, I woke to the sound of someone whispering under my bed. Not inside the wall, under the mattress. I stayed perfectly still, sweat freezing on my neck, heart smashing against my ribs. Then I heard it, breathing, shallow, wet, close. When I finally moved, flipped the light on, yanked the sheets back, crouched to look, there was nothing there, just my floorboards, but scratched into the wood, over and over and over, were the words, "You brought it home." I packed a bag. I left. I drove 3 states away. I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere, changed my name on every social account, disconnected from everything. But I still feel it, watching, waiting. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the forest. I hear the cassette tapes. I dream of being buried alive. And in those dreams, the ground isn't dirt. It's paper, pages of a journal, pages written by hands that don't age, hands that keep writing. And somewhere in a bunker beneath the trees, I know Elias Warren is still taking notes. I lasted 3 weeks in the cabin before the dreams turned to visitations. At first it was subtle. The old cassette player I'd brought with me as some twisted souvenir clicked on by itself at exactly 3:17 a.m., always playing that warped, demonic hiss from tape V. Then came the phone calls. I'd hear my mother's voice, but she's been dead 5 years, whispering my name from the other end. Then silence. Then once a low, breathy chuckle. I burned the tapes in a fire pit behind the cabin. Or tried to. I watched the plastic cases melt and curl into bubbling sludge, the ribbons sizzling in the flames. But the next morning, they were back on my table. Clean. Untouched. I knew then that I hadn't escaped anything. I hadn't found an answer. I had opened something. Like a wound. Like a seal. Something Warren had locked away, not just to hide, but to contain. Something that had been feeding off what he'd done. Or maybe something that guided it. Either way, it wasn't done with me. I made the decision that morning. I go back. Not because I was brave. Not because I wanted to be a hero. But because I couldn't take another night of hearing screams coming from inside the walls. I couldn't wake up to find teeth on my pillow. Human teeth, small and yellowed. Too many of them for any one mouth. I couldn't keep pulling long strands of dark hair from my own throat each time I took a drink of water. Something was coming undone. Reality itself felt thin around me, like paper stretched too far. And I knew that the center of this madness, the infection site, the core of the ritual or experiment or curse or whatever this was, it was beneath that forest, beneath that bunker. So I packed my bag, armed myself with every flashlight, battery, weapon, and bottle of holy water I could find. Yes, holy water, I wasn't ruling anything out anymore, and I drove straight through the night, back to Rockland Creek. The forest greeted me like it had been waiting. Fog clung to the ground. Trees stood like watchmen. The path to the bunker was overgrown, but I could still find it, muscle memory guiding me past the carvings in the trees, the strange depressions in the soil where something large had been dragged. I reached the bunker just before dawn. The metal door groaned like it recognized me, like it was happy to see me again. This time it wasn't sealed. The bolt was broken, rusted through. It swung inward with a sound like a dying animal. Inside, the air was still, heavy, like the bunker had lungs and I'd just stepped into them. The walls were concrete, but lined with thin veins of black mold that pulsed slightly in my flashlight beam. The hall sloped downward, deeper than should have been possible. I walked for what felt like 20 minutes, heart hammering, each step echoing forever. Then I found the room that IT was circular, a large concrete dome, wires dangling from the ceiling like vines, some still sparking. In the center was a chair, not just any chair, a steel medical chair, complete with restraints, arm clamps, and a drain beneath it stained the color of rust and meat. Around it were shelves, and on those shelves were jars. Hundreds of them, each one labeled with a code. Inside the jars, pieces, eyes, teeth, organs I didn't recognize. Some still twitched. One looked like a fetus with too many limbs. I moved quickly, not letting myself fully comprehend, knowing if I did, I'd go insane. Then I found the wall of photographs, hundreds of them, maybe more, each one pinned, labeled, all the missing, all the ones Warren had taken, posed, prepped, some of them smiling, like they hadn't known what was coming, others screaming. One photo was of me. It was recent. It was taken in my cabin. I hadn't seen it before. I fell to the floor, dry heaved until my ribs hurt. Then the lights flickered, not from my flashlight, but the overhead fluorescents that hadn't worked in decades. They came on, one by one, illuminating the dome in bursts of cold, sterile white. And then he walked in, not a ghost, not a monster, a man, or what used to be one, tall, thin, skin the color of old wax, eyes completely white, as if the irises had dissolved long ago. And on his chest, burned into the skin like a brand, was the symbol, the triangle, the cross, upside down. "You came," he said, voice dry, rasping. "You shouldn't have." Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He tilted his head, eyes not seeing but knowing. "You broke the cycle. You brought light where it was not meant to go. You opened the grave." I asked who he was. He smiled, lips cracked open like old paint. "I was Warren, once, but I am the archive now." He gestured around the room. "We are memory. We are continuation. Without us, the forest forgets. Without the ritual, the cycle collapses. The children will return. You do not want that." I screamed at him, called him a murderer, a monster, a coward. He only nodded. "Yes, but I am necessary. You were not supposed to find this." I raised the gun. He didn't flinch. "You'll only kill what I was, not what I became." I fired. The shot rang like a thunderclap through the bunker. He fell, collapsed backward into the chair. Blood, black, not red, began to pool around him. But he laughed. "Too late. It's already loose." The lights blew out. The floor cracked, and something rose from beneath the chair. Something massive. Something wrong. It wasn't a creature. It was absence. A void shaped like a man, like a scream given flesh, and it reached toward me with arms that bent the wrong way, and mouths on its palms whispered truths I was never meant to hear. That I ran. I ran until my lungs gave out. I emerged from the bunker just as the sun rose over the forest, and behind me, I swear I heard the sound of hundreds of footsteps, all walking in unison. A parade of the forgotten, the failed, the harvested that I made it to my car. Drove until my gas tank died. I've been in motels ever since. Never the same one. I see them sometimes, the children, in reflections, in the windows of passing cars, in dreams that feel more real than waking life. I hear scratching in every wall. My body aches in ways that don't match the weather. And sometimes, late at night, the old cassette player I smashed into pieces clicks on, and it plays my voice, begging, screaming. They say the Rockland Creek cold cases have started popping up again. Old families are being contacted by anonymous sources. Boxes of items are showing up on doorsteps. A necklace, a shoe, a photograph. Each time the evidence matches. Each time a case is closed. The local papers call it a miracle, a mysterious good Samaritan. But I know the truth. The archive doesn't hide any more .it moves, and it remembers, and it always adds new names to the shelves. Story 2. I've always lived in quiet neighborhoods, the kind where everyone keeps their lawn mowed, their porch lights on at night, and their business to themselves. It's not that people don't talk, but it's surface-level stuff, the weather, traffic, how fast Amazon deliveries are these days. That's why when I moved into Maple Grove last spring, I thought I'd finally found the kind of peace I'd been looking for. After the chaos of living downtown, the blaring sirens, the stinking alleyways, the shouting at all hours, this suburb felt like heaven. My house was a modest two-bedroom with a detached garage, a little porch swing, and hedges that looked like they hadn't been trimmed since the 90s. I didn't mind. I liked the overgrown charm of it. Most of the homes on my street were occupied by middle-aged couples or retirees, and nothing about the place screamed creepy or sinister. That is, until I met Marcus. He lived 2 houses down from me. A man maybe in his early 40s, tall, pale, with shaggy brown hair and a way of speaking like every word had to be measured before it was released. At first, he was polite if distant. We'd nod at each other when I took the trash out, or occasionally exchange a morning if our paths crossed while grabbing mail. But that was about it. I figured he was just private or maybe shy. His house was well kept but old, white vinyl siding with green shutters, a small garden in front that always looked freshly turned, even though I never once saw him tending to it. The only strange thing I noticed early on was that his backyard shed had a lock on the outside. Not a padlock, but a reinforced latch, the kind you'd see on a storage unit or bunker. I remember thinking that was a bit excessive for a lawnmower, but again, I chalked it up to people being quirky. But then came the night he knocked on my door. 2:17 a.m. I'll never forget that time because I remember looking at the clock and feeling that immediate spike of dread you get when something breaks the normal rhythm of your life. I was still awake, half watching reruns of some crime show, trying to fall asleep on the couch. The knock was soft, but urgent. 4 taps, pause, then 3 more. I waited a moment, thinking maybe I imagined it. Then it came again. When I opened the door, Marcus was standing there barefoot in a pair of pajama pants and a white undershirt. His eyes glassy and unfocused, mouth slack like he was about to drool. "Marcus," I asked, and he didn't answer. He just stepped past me, walked into my living room, and sat down on my couch. I stood there, stunned, trying to decide if I was supposed to call someone or just ride it out. Then he spoke. "I didn't want to do it," he said, voice flat, distant. "But I had to." They kept screaming. I tried to bury them deep, but the rain always brings them back. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I thought maybe he was quoting something, sleep talking, or maybe having a breakdown. "They're still there," he whispered, staring at the blank TV screen. "The boy near the elm, the woman under the hydrangeas, and the baby?" His voice cracked. "God, the baby." That's when I realized he was sleepwalking. Eyes open, body moving, but not present. I waved a hand in front of his face and got nothing. No reaction, just that haunted whisper. Every night I hear them crawling, dirt in their lungs, fingernails snapping on the inside of the coffin lid. I can't sleep. They won't let me. I backed away, heart hammering. I knew I should wake him. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Wake a sleepwalker? But something about the way he sat there, unmoving, voice cracked and raw, made me freeze. After 10 minutes, he stood, walked to the door, and left. No goodbye, no closing the door, just gone. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My chest ached from the adrenaline, and every shadow in my house seemed to stretch longer, darker than before. I wasn't sure if I dreamed what Marcus said or if it was real, that haunting confession about bodies buried in his backyard. But deep down, something told me it was real. I debated calling the police, but what would I say? My neighbor sleepwalked into my living room and confessed to murder? It sounded insane. Instead, I kept an eye on him from a distance. Marcus didn't seem himself in the days that followed. He became even more reclusive, rarely leaving his house, and when he did, he moved like a ghost, quiet, dragging his feet. I noticed that the lawn in his backyard was oddly bare, a patch of earth that looked freshly disturbed despite the early spring frost. There were no flowers, no grass, just dark, damp soil that seemed to soak up the light. Sometimes at night, I'd hear muffled noises from his property. Scratching, thumping, even low, wet sounds that didn't belong to any animal I knew. I couldn't stop staring at the shed door from my kitchen window. The reinforced latch glinted faintly in the moonlight, almost daring me to find out what was behind it. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps on my porch. I bolted upright in bed and looked toward the window. There was Marcus, standing just outside, staring at my house with those glassy eyes again. He wasn't wearing shoes, and his pajama pants were torn and dirty. He raised a shaking hand and knocked once, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. The next day, I found footprints in the mud leading from my front steps to the edge of the yard, bare feet, deep prints pressed into the soft earth. I wanted to confront him, but I was terrified of what I might learn, terrified of how far his mind might have slipped. At the same time, I felt a sick curiosity growing inside me, gnawing at the back of my thoughts like a rat. I started looking up missing persons reports from the area, and what I found chilled me to the bone. 3 disappearances from the last 5 years. A teenage boy, a middle-aged woman, and a baby. All reported missing near our neighborhood, and none found. The descriptions matched the names Marcus had muttered in his sleep. That night, I stayed up with my phone, staring at the old satellite images of our street, zooming in and out of Marcus's backyard, looking for anything suspicious. I noticed something strange. A large dark patch near the back fence that seemed out of place, almost like a freshly dug grave. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was trying to tell me something with that sleepwalking confession, that maybe he wasn't fully in control of what he was doing. But as days stretched into a week, Marcus's behavior grew darker. He started leaving his house less, and sometimes I thought I saw him carrying heavy bags or tools toward the shed late at night. And one morning, when I peeked through the gap in the fence, I saw the shed door wide open, something I'd never seen before, and inside, the faintest glint of a shovel blade leaned against the wall. That's when I realized I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. I had to find out the truth, even if it terrified me. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was some desperate need to prove I wasn't imagining things. But one night, just after midnight, I slipped out of my house with a flashlight, a garden trowel, and my phone recording everything. The street was deserted and cloaked in a thick fog that muffled my footsteps. I stood at the edge of Marcus's backyard, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The patch of earth I'd seen from the satellite photos, that odd, bare spot near the back fence, was right where I thought it would be. The soil was loose, still damp from a recent rain, and there were faint depressions that looked like someone had been digging there regularly. I dropped to my knees, feeling the cold bite of the earth on my skin as I started to dig. At first, it was just dirt and roots, but then, about 2 feet down, my trowel hit something hard. I cleared the soil away faster, panic and adrenaline mixing into a cold stew in my stomach. Then I saw it. A small piece of fabric, stained and torn, tangled in what looked like dried blood. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. It was part of a baby's blanket, the faded pastel pattern unmistakable. My breath caught. I kept digging, deeper and deeper, until my fingers scraped against something solid. A box. a wooden coffin crudely made and rotting at the edges. I shone my flashlight inside, and the beam hit something so horrifying I nearly dropped the tool. Inside were bones, tiny bones, a skull the size of a grapefruit, rib bones curled like brittle leaves. A small, rusted bracelet lay beside the remains, engraved with a name I couldn't make out in the dim light. I vomited right there on the soil, choking on the awful realization that Marcus had been telling the truth. I called 911, voice shaking as I reported the discovery. The dispatcher told me to stay put, not to touch anything else. But when the police arrived, they were skeptical. I understand why. A man bursts into a neighbor's yard at 2 a.m. digging up graves? It sounded insane. But the forensics team took over, and the medical examiner confirmed the remains were human. They matched a missing child's profile from years ago. A child reported missing within a few miles of our neighborhood, never found until now. After the news got out, neighbors started whispering. Some avoided my gaze. Others nodded as if they'd known something dark all along. Marcus was arrested that morning. I watched through my window as they took him away, his face blank, eyes distant, like a man who'd been dead inside for years. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few days, more bones were uncovered. Not just the child, but a woman's remains beneath the hydrangeas, and a man near the elm tree Marcus had muttered about in his sleep. The ground was a patchwork of horrors, and the more the police dug, the more skeletons they found. Some from recent years, others decades old. The neighborhood was shaken to its core, but no one seemed surprised. Some neighbors even confessed that they'd heard strange noises at night, seen Marcus digging in the dark, smelled decay carried on the wind. The local news ran story after story, but I knew the worst part was still coming. Because the night Marcus confessed in his sleep wasn't just a random episode. It was a glimpse into a nightmare that had been unfolding silently, right in our backyard. And it was far from over. After Marcus was taken into custody, the neighborhood tried to return to normal, but the weight of what had been unearthed lingered like a foul fog. Couldn't sleep. Every creak in my house sounded like footsteps, every shadow a lurking presence. Then, about a week after the police had cordoned off his yard, I found something unexpected. A small, weathered envelope slipped through my mailbox, with no return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased, a page torn from a diary. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, and as I read, I realized it was Marcus's. The entries detailed his descent, the voices he heard in the backyard, the nightmares about the buried bodies clawing their way to the surface, the sleepless nights where he tried to silence them by digging deeper, burying secrets beneath the soil. One line chilled me to the bone. They don't forgive, they don't forget. Every scream buries me alive. The letter ended abruptly, as if torn out in panic. I clutched it to my chest, heart pounding. Who had sent this? Was it Marcus? Was someone else watching? Then, late at night, the disturbances began at my own home. Scratches on the walls, soft cries that echoed through the air vents, and footsteps pacing just beyond the window. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, but the unease was undeniable. The police called me for more questioning, but I refused to go back to the station. I started digging into Marcus's past, finding old addresses, neighbors, and whispers of a troubled childhood. Something about a foster home, disappearances, and a family that vanished without a trace. The more I uncovered, the more I realized Marcus's nightmare wasn't isolated. It was part of something much larger, a web of horrors hidden beneath the veneer of suburbia. My neighbors began locking their doors tighter, watching the shadows with wary eyes. And I kept the diary pages close, the only link to the man who confessed to me while sleepwalking about bodies buried in his backyard. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. After receiving the diary pages, things spiraled quickly into chaos. The nights became a battleground where sleep was elusive, and the line between reality and nightmare blurred beyond recognition. Around 3 a.m., the phone in my house started ringing incessantly. Calls with no one on the other end, or worse, faint whispers echoing through the static. I answered once, only to hear heavy breathing and the unmistakable sound of digging. I slammed the phone down, heart racing. Determined to find some evidence, I installed a few security cameras around my property and managed to get a neighbor to let me use theirs to keep an eye on Marcus's abandoned house. What I saw chilled me to the core. On several nights, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, furtively pacing the backyard, sometimes kneeling near the spots where the bodies had been found. The figure dug, paused, and whispered inaudible words into the cold air. Sometimes it was a man, other times the shape seemed distorted, almost unnatural. And then there were nights when the cameras captured nothing but static, followed by a sudden loud bang, like a heavy object hitting the ground. I felt watched, hunted even. My dreams were invaded by Marcus's voice, pleading, confessing, begging for forgiveness. I started hearing voices when I was awake, whispers crawling up my spine, words in a language I couldn't understand, telling me to bury the secrets deeper or face their wrath. I began to question my own sanity. Was Marcus's guilt contagious? Had I unearthed something that wasn't meant to be disturbed? I started leaving my house in the middle of the night, wandering the streets, desperate to escape the shadows that seemed to cling to my skin. One night, while walking past Marcus's house, I saw fresh soil piled near the back fence. I felt compelled to dig, and what I uncovered defied explanation. A set of small human bones, arranged in a neat circle. Around the bones were strange symbols scratched into the dirt, triangles, crosses, and spirals. My hands shook as I took pictures with my phone, but when I tried to show them to the police, the images were corrupted, blank screens staring back at me. The police dismissed my concerns as stress-induced delusions, but I knew better. Something was alive beneath the earth, something restless. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door, written in the same jagged handwriting as the diary. "You're next if you don't stop digging." Panic set in, but so did a grim resolve. I had to uncover the truth. I couldn't let Marcus's confessions fade into silence. The darkness was spreading, consuming everything, and I was running out of time. The night the note slipped under my door, my hands trembled as I unfolded the crumpled paper. The jagged words etched into my mind like a curse. "You're next if you don't stop digging." I stared at it for what felt like hours, the weight of dread crushing me. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every whisper outside, became a sign that someone, or something, was watching me. The paranoia took hold, but beneath it all, a burning determination grew. I couldn't let Marcus's truth die buried beneath silence and dirt. If I ran, if I hid, they'd win. So I prepared. I collected flashlights, gloves, shovels, and even a metal detector from a local pawn shop. I wasn't just going to dig. I was going to find out what secrets the earth was hiding and bring them into the light. That night, with the moon cloaked behind thick clouds, I slipped into Marcus's backyard, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something darker. Decay, fear, regret. The spot where the bodies had been found was cordoned off by police tape now, but I ignored it. I dropped to my knees and began to dig. The soil was soft, almost too soft, like it was waiting for me. After what felt like hours, my shovel struck something solid, another coffin. This one was different, covered in strange carvings that resembled the symbols I'd seen scratched into the dirt before. I hesitated, then cleared the dirt away, revealing a rusted metal latch. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was not a body, but a box filled with papers. Yellowed, brittle, and filled with handwriting that was almost illegible. They were diaries, letters, and photographs. Some with faces I recognized from old missing persons posters, others unknown, their eyes haunting me from the pages. One letter caught my eye. It was addressed to Marcus, written by a woman named Eleanor, pleading for him to stop the madness, warning him of a curse tied to the land and the secrets buried beneath. The entries spoke of sacrifices, rituals, and a darkness that demanded payment in blood. Suddenly, a noise behind me, a rustling, a whisper, made me freeze. I turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the night. There, just beyond the fence, stood a figure cloaked in shadow, face hidden beneath a hood, watching. Before I could react, they vanished into the darkness. I was not alone. The backyard felt alive, watching, waiting. I packed up what I could and fled, but the encounter left me shaken. I realized this was no ordinary horror. It was a living nightmare, fed by guilt, madness, and something far older than Marcus or me. Days later, the police returned to the site after a tip about the new discovery. I handed over the papers, but they treated it like folklore, dismissing it as superstition. Yet, at night, the whispers continued. The footprints outside my door, the flickering lights, the cold spots that chilled me to the bone. And in my dreams, Marcus's voice calls out, not as a man confessing, but as a warning. The bodies in the backyard were only the beginning. The true horror was the darkness waiting beneath, patient and hungry, and it was watching me. After that night in Marcus's yard, everything changed. The line between waking and sleeping blurred into a haze of fear and confusion. I started seeing things. Shadows moving just beyond my vision, glimpses of figures standing silently at the edge of the trees, watching me. At first, I thought it was exhaustion, paranoia taking hold, but then my neighbors began to behave strangely. The once friendly faces now avoided eye contact, their conversations dropping to whispers when I walked by. Doors and windows were shut tight, blinds drawn even during the day. One evening, while returning home, I noticed a strange symbol etched into the bark of a tree near the sidewalk, a triangle crossed by a jagged line. The same symbol I'd seen carved near the graves in Marcus's yard and on some of the papers I found in the box. My phone began acting up, shutting down for no reason, texts disappearing, calls dropping. When I tried to call the police again, my call wouldn't connect. I started hearing voices at night, soft murmurs in a language I didn't understand, sometimes calling my name, other times chanting in unison. I installed cameras around my property, hoping to catch evidence of whoever, or whatever, was stalking me. The footage showed fleeting shapes darting between the trees, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. One night, I caught a figure standing on my porch, watching me silently before dissolving into the shadows when I flicked on the porch light. Sleep became impossible. I'd wake in cold sweats, heart pounding, convinced I felt breath on my neck or fingers grazing my skin. The diary and letters I'd taken from the coffin became my only connection to understanding what was happening. They spoke of an ancient curse tied to the land, one that demanded offerings, blood, bodies, to appease the unseen watchers. Marcus hadn't been a killer by choice. He'd been trapped in this cycle of darkness, forced to bury the victims to keep the curse at bay. But by uncovering his secret, I'd broken the balance. The watchers were angry. One night, I found a fresh pile of dirt in my backyard, perfectly shaped like a grave. I touched the soil and felt a coldness seep into my bones. The wind carried faint screams. I knew then that the watchers had marked me. Couldn't run, couldn't hide. The darkness had found me, and it wanted me to join the others buried beneath the earth. Desperation pushed me to reach out to a local historian, someone rumored to know the old legends of the area. When I met with her, she confirmed my fears. The land had a violent history, ancient rituals tied to sacrifice, and a secret society that once ruled in shadows. She warned me to leave, to never return, but it was too late. The watchers were here, and their hunger was insatiable. Now, every night is a fight for my sanity and my life. The boundaries of reality are slipping, and I fear that soon, I'll be another name whispered in the wind. Another body buried in a backyard no one dares to enter. The weeks that followed were a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The watchers didn't just lurk outside anymore. They invaded my mind, my dreams, my every waking thought. Every mirror in my house became a portal, reflecting not my face but twisted, decayed versions of myself, mouths agape in silent screams. My phone calls remained dead lines, my emails unreadable. Even my closest friends stopped responding, as if I had vanished into thin air. I tried to fight it, delving deeper into the diaries and letters I'd recovered. Each page revealed darker secrets, a lineage of bloodshed, of ritualistic sacrifice, and a curse passed down through generations bound to the land itself. The historian told me of the Watchers, ancient spirits, once guardians, turned malevolent after centuries of neglect and pain. They demanded balance, offerings, justice, whatever they called it, and when Marcus had buried those bodies, he thought he was containing the evil. But his guilt twisted it, strengthened it. And now the curse was mine to bear. One night, overwhelmed by the whispering voices and crushing paranoia, I found myself drawn back to Marcus's yard. I stood in the cold mud, under the shadow of the elm tree where the first body was found. The earth beneath me pulsed with something alive and dark. Then the ground cracked, and from the depths rose skeletal hands, reaching, grasping, begging for release or revenge. I couldn't tell which. I stumbled back, gasping, but a cold voice filled the air, deep and ancient. "You opened the door. You must pay the price." The next moments were a blur. Shadows coalesced into figures, the Watchers revealing themselves as twisted, mournful specters, neither alive nor dead, bound to the land and its blood-soaked secrets. They encircled me, chanting words that echoed through the hollow night, words that seeped into my soul, stripping away sanity and hope. I screamed until I was hoarse, until the voices drowned out my cries. When dawn broke, I was alone in the yard, clothes torn, hands bleeding from clawing at the soil. But I knew it wasn't over. The Watchers had marked me as one of their own, trapped in a cycle that would never end unless the curse was broken. Somehow, desperation pushed me to seek out the remaining relics, the objects Marcus hid, the symbols carved into trees, the old letters and diaries that hinted at a ritual of release. The final confrontation was inevitable. Armed with knowledge and a resolve born from terror, I prepared to descend once more into the earth's dark embrace, to face the Watchers, to either end the nightmare or be consumed by it forever. As I write this, I can hear the whispers growing louder, the shadows pressing in tighter. The Watchers are coming, and I can only hope my story will be the warning they never gave me. To those who listen, beware the secrets buried beneath your feet, for some graves are better left unopened. After weeks of torment and sleepless nights, I knew I couldn't run anymore. The Watchers had claimed every quiet moment, every shadowed corner of my mind. So I decided to face them head-on, armed with the fragmented knowledge pieced together from Marcus's diaries, the letters from Eleanor, and the eerie symbols etched into the trees and soil. The historian had given me a crude map of the sites where sacrifices were made, and a ritual meant to sever the curse binding these restless spirits to the land. A ritual requiring the deepest honesty, sacrifice, and a willingness to confront the darkness within myself. One cold evening, under a moonless sky, I returned to Marcus's backyard. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something fouler, a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I gathered the relics I had collected, a rusted locket, a faded photograph, a broken toy, and the letters, and arranged them in a circle around me. I began the incantation written in Eleanor's letters, a plea for release, forgiveness, and peace. As I spoke the ancient words, the ground beneath me shuddered, and the Watchers appeared, their forms flickering between human and monstrous. Their hollow eyes bore into me, and the whispering voices grew into a roar, filling the night with a cacophony of rage, sorrow, and despair. The ritual demanded more than words, it demanded a price. I was to offer up my own memories of fear, pain, and guilt, allowing the Watchers to consume them and, in turn, release the trapped souls they guarded. Each memory I surrendered burned like acid, but as the ritual progressed, I felt the oppressive weight begin to lift. The Watchers wavered, their forms flickering, their voices softening. Then came a moment of unbearable silence, a calm before the final storm. Suddenly, the ground cracked open beneath me, and spectral hands emerged once more. But this time, they reached not to grasp, but to receive. I fell into the darkness, enveloped by cold, sorrowful souls whispering thanks as they were freed from their earthly bonds. I awoke hours later in my own bed, soaked in sweat, the relics beside me now cold and inert. The oppressive presence was gone. The Watchers had released their hold. But freedom came at a price. I felt hollow, as if pieces of my soul had been carved away. My memories were fragmented, and my reflection in the mirror seemed a stranger's face staring back at me. Days passed with an uneasy peace settling over the neighborhood. The police closed the cases, finally able to identify the remains and give the victims proper burials. Marcus's name was cleared of malicious intent. He had been a victim of the curse, too. But I remain haunted. The watchers are gone, but their whispers linger in the corners of my mind, reminding me that some secrets, once unearthed, can never truly be buried again. I share the story as a warning and a confession. If your neighbor begins to confess things in their sleep, listen closely. Sometimes the truth is buried in silence, but uncovering it might be the darkest path of all. Story 3. I never thought my family had secrets worth fearing. My uncle, James, was always the quiet type, a man who kept to himself, lived a simple life in a small town not far from where I grew up. I never met the woman whose name haunted my family dinners, a woman named Sarah, whose disappearance was a wound in the community and, ultimately, a stain on James's life. The story was straightforward. Sarah was found dead in the woods just outside town, a victim of foul play, and James was arrested, tried, and convicted for her murder 5 years ago. No one ever questioned it too much because the evidence seemed airtight. His fingerprints on the murder weapon, witnesses claiming he'd argued with her days before, and James's own silence. The conviction left a permanent scar, a taboo topic whispered about only in hushed tones. But last week, everything I thought I knew shattered when I received the first text. It was from an unknown number, a simple message that read, "I'm still here." My phone buzzed while I was brushing my teeth, and when I glanced down, the message sent a chill through me. My heart stuttered. I stared at the screen, certain it was some sick prank. I tried to block the number, but the messages kept coming. The next one was more unsettling. "They got it wrong. I'm not gone." Panic clawed at my throat. Who was this? How did they know about James? I told myself it was a hacker or someone trying to mess with me, but the texts were too specific. They referenced details about Sarah's disappearance only someone close would know. Over the next few days, the messages grew darker, more desperate. "Look closer. Find me. Don't trust the lies they told you. James didn't do it." I began digging through old news articles, court transcripts, and police reports, trying to reconcile these cryptic messages with the nightmare my family lived through. Every new detail twisted the story further. Witness statements recanted, evidence mishandled, people disappearing from the case files altogether. It was as if someone had been covering something up all along. Then came the pictures. Grainy, taken in the dead of night, showing a figure near the woods where Sarah's body had been found. But the figure didn't look like James. It looked wrong, hollow-eyed, too thin, with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. I started to realize I was dealing with something I couldn't explain. The texts, the photos, the whispers of doubt. It was as if Sarah herself was reaching out from beyond the grave, begging me to uncover the truth. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that whatever was texting me wasn't just a victim. It was something far more sinister. My Uncle James, the man my family mourned and feared, might have been innocent. But that innocence came with a terrible price. And I was caught in the middle of a horror story that had only just begun. The texts kept coming, each one unraveling the threads of what I thought was a closed case. I found myself compulsively scrolling through the message history, looking for clues, patterns, anything that could explain who was behind the cryptic words. "Find me," it said, but where? I had no idea. I began to dig deeper into the digital archives. Old court files, police reports, even video footage from the original investigation. That's when I stumbled across something strange. A folder buried deep in a police database, labeled simply Sarah Case Evidence. Inside were photographs, but not the kind you'd expect. These were grainy, distorted images from security cameras in the area, but they didn't seem to match the official timeline. Some showed shadows lurking near the crime scene hours before Sarah was reported missing. Others showed a figure, a silhouette, standing just out of frame, too obscured to identify, but disturbingly familiar. And then there were the audio recordings from 911 calls. Muffled voices, strange noises, and an eerie whisper at the end of one call that sent chills down my spine. I wasn't supposed to have access to these files. Somehow, I was looking at the suppressed evidence, the stuff that was never presented in court. Suddenly, there was a knock at my door, hard and deliberate, at 1:03 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. My hands trembled as I peered through the peephole. Outside was a man I didn't recognize. Pale, eyes darting nervously, clutching a crumpled envelope. I didn't open the door, but the man slipped the envelope under it and disappeared into the night before I could react. Inside the envelope were documents. Notes scribbled in frantic handwriting, detailing observations about Sarah's last days, cryptic references to people who don't want the truth known, and warnings to stay away or become the next victim. My heart hammered in my chest. I was now tangled in a dangerous game, one that someone wanted to keep buried, by any means necessary. As I sat in my living room, clutching the papers, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "They're watching you. Don't trust anyone." I realized the nightmare wasn't just about my uncle or Sarah anymore. It was about a darkness that had seeped into every corner of my life, and it was only just beginning to consume me. I couldn't ignore the texts, the notes, or the strange visitor, no matter how terrified I felt. Every piece of the puzzle dragged me deeper into a labyrinth of lies, secrets, and something so dark it clawed at the edges of reason. I spent countless hours poring over every detail of Sarah's case, cross-referencing witness statements, timelines, and forensic reports. Slowly, a different picture emerged. One where my Uncle James wasn't the villain, but perhaps the scapegoat. I found records of a second, unnamed suspect, someone who'd never been questioned or even mentioned publicly. What's worse, the police files showed that evidence tying this figure to the scene had been tampered with or disappeared entirely. It was like someone had gone to great lengths to erase their existence. The woods where Sarah was found became an obsession. I drove out there late one night, flashlight in hand, phone recording every step. The trees towered like silent sentinels, their branches scratching at the sky like desperate fingers. As I moved deeper, I felt eyes on me, the crunch of leaves underfoot sounding too loud in the stillness. Then I heard it. A whisper carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable, said my name. My breath caught. I wasn't alone. I followed the voice to a small clearing where the ground was disturbed, freshly turned soil in a perfect circle. My heart pounded as I knelt and brushed away the dirt. Beneath was a small, rusted box, its lock broken and the lid hanging open. Inside were keepsakes. A locket, a child's toy, a faded photograph of Sarah smiling, unaware of the horror she would soon face. A chill ran through me as my phone vibrated. Another message, "Look deeper." Suddenly, footsteps shattered the silence. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the blackness, but saw only shadows retreating between the trees. Panic surged. I ran, heart racing, lungs burning, until the woods gave way to the streetlights. That night, I realized I wasn't just chasing a story. I was being hunted by something that wanted the truth buried forever. The texts kept coming, each more desperate and cryptic, warning me that some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered. But the more I learned, the more I understood that the real horror wasn't the crime itself. It was the darkness lurking behind the lies, the unseen forces determined to keep Sarah's story untold, no matter the cost. The days that followed my terrifying encounter in the woods felt like walking through a waking nightmare. I was consumed by the mystery, unable to shake the feeling that I was spiraling towards something I might never escape. The notes from the stranger and the relentless texts painted a picture of a dark conspiracy. But nothing was as haunting as the discovery I made one rainy afternoon while rifling through my uncle's old belongings, which my family had stored away in my parents' basement after his arrest. Among the dusty boxes, I found a battered leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. It wasn't my uncle's handwriting, but someone else's, someone who knew Sarah intimately. The journal detailed a secret life Sarah had kept hidden, filled with cryptic entries about fear, a presence she couldn't escape, and ominous mentions of an old cellar beneath a house on the edge of town. The address matched an abandoned property only a few miles from where Sarah disappeared. Fueled by a mix of dread and determination, I set out to find the house. The streets were slick with rain, and the sky was a dull gray when I pulled up to the derelict building. The windows were boarded, paint peeled like scabs from the walls, and the air smelled of decay and forgotten sorrow. I forced open a side door that gave way with a creak, stepping inside to a thick darkness that swallowed the flashlight's beam. My heart hammered as I descended a narrow staircase into the cellar below. The walls were damp, cold, and covered in strange symbols scratched into the plaster. Triangles, spirals, crosses, similar to those from Marcus's yard that haunted my earlier nightmares. Then I heard it, whispering voices that seemed to seep from the very walls themselves. They were fragmented, overlapping, a chorus of fear, regret, and desperate pleas for release. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling the vibrations beneath my palm. In the corner of the cellar, hidden beneath a broken wooden floorboard, I uncovered a shallow grave, a small box buried just beneath the soil. Inside lay a collection of objects: a broken music box, strands of hair, and a faded photograph of Sarah with a man whose face was scratched out. The realization hit me like a blow. This was more than a crime. It was a curse, an evil rooted deep in the town's soil and history. As I turned to leave, the cellar door slammed shut behind me. The whispers grew louder, becoming agonized screams. Panic surged, but then a cold calm washed over me. I spoke aloud, promising to uncover the truth, to bring light to the darkness, and to set the restless souls free. Moments later, the door creaked open, and I fled into the stormy night. I knew then that the walls held secrets older and darker than I'd imagined, and that my search for the truth would come at a terrifying cost. After that harrowing night in the cellar, I realized I was no longer just chasing a murder mystery. I was unraveling the fabric of an entire town's dark, twisted history. The symbols carved into the cellar walls weren't random. They were part of an ancient code linked to old rituals and sacrifices dating back centuries. I turned to the local library archives, poring over dusty newspapers, faded maps, and brittle documents that painted a grim portrait of the town's past. The place was built over the grounds of what had once been a secret society, a cult that believed in appeasing unseen forces through blood offerings buried deep beneath the earth. Their members vanished mysteriously, but their legacy of horror seeped into the soil, infecting generation after generation. Sarah had been caught in the middle of it all, a pawn sacrificed to keep the curse dormant. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Marcus wasn't just an isolated case. He was part of a long lineage of victims and perpetrators, bound by guilt and desperation. The Watchers, as the folklore called them, were said to be spirits that guarded the land's secrets, punishing those who dared to uncover the truth. I reached out to an old historian who had spent decades researching the cult's history. She warned me to stop digging, claiming that some secrets could destroy not just a person, but an entire community. But I was already too deep. Around this time, my phone began to malfunction. Messages I sent never reached their recipients. Calls dropped, and sometimes I'd get no signal at all, even in the middle of town. It was like I was being cut off from the world. Strange things happened at home too. Items moved when I wasn't looking, windows opened on their own, and shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of my vision. One night, I awoke to find strange symbols drawn in dirt outside my bedroom window, exactly like those from the cellar and the woods. I felt watched, hunted. Then came the knock, slow, deliberate, on my front door at 3 a.m. When I opened it, no one was there, just a small, crudely wrapped package. Inside was a broken music box, the same kind I'd found in the cellar, playing a haunting melody that seemed to reach into my soul. I realized then that the Watchers were not just stories. They were real. They were waiting for me to either join their eternal vigil or be consumed by the darkness they wielded. And as the nights grew longer and colder, I knew my time was running out. The shadows were closing in, and the line between the living and the dead was growing thinner every day. I had uncovered the truth. but the price of knowing it was far higher than I ever imagined. The nightmare was far from over. By the time I reached this breaking point, I was a shell of the person I once was. The relentless pressure of the Watcher's presence, the haunting messages, and the terrifying discoveries had eroded every ounce of peace I had left. I was drowning in a sea of doubt, paranoia, and fear, unable to trust even my own mind. Friends and family distanced themselves, whispering about how I'd changed, how I seemed lost, haunted by something no one else could see or understand. Then, one night, I received a message unlike the others. Meet me where the truth ends. It was an invitation and a warning. The coordinates led me to the outskirts of town, to an old abandoned chapel hidden by overgrown trees and thorny bushes, a place I'd never seen before despite years living here. The air was thick with decay and silence, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel path. Inside, the chapel was a ruin, stained glass shattered, pews overturned, and the scent of damp stone and forgotten prayers clinging to the air. But what caught my eye was a large, ancient book resting on the altar, bound in cracked leather and sealed with rusty iron clasps. I forced it open, and the pages revealed the true history of the Watchers. Guardians once pure and protective, twisted over centuries by pain and bloodshed into vengeful spirits, cursed to roam the land and punish those who disturbed their rest. The final pages detailed a ritual, one last chance to break the curse by confronting the Watchers face to face and offering the ultimate sacrifice. As I read, the chapel grew cold, shadows lengthening until the Watchers materialized around me. Silent, looming figures cloaked in darkness, their hollow eyes filled with ancient sorrow. They spoke without words, a flood of emotions and memories crashing into me, of betrayal, loss, and endless torment. The Watchers demanded a choice: join them in eternal vigil to guard the secrets or face oblivion. My mind screamed, but a strange calm settled over me. I realized that my journey wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about becoming part of the story, becoming the keeper of the secrets, the bearer of the curse. The last thing I remember is reaching out my hand, the shadows enveloping me, and the world fading into a void of silence and darkness. Now, I write this as a warning to anyone who might hear my tale. Some truths are prisons, some secrets are chains, and some shadows are forever. If you hear a voice in the night, a whisper calling your name, beware, because the Watchers are always waiting, and the price for their secrets is higher than you can imagine. Story 4. I bought the old roadside motel for next to nothing. A decaying, ivy-choked heap of mid-century Americana rotting quietly on the outskirts of a forgotten town no one seemed to remember ever existing. The Sunset Pines Motor Lodge. I'd seen it in a tax auction listing after the county finally repossessed it from whoever had last tried and failed to revive the place. I'm not a developer, not in the traditional sense, more of a restorer. I flip properties that have character, the ones everyone else avoids. And Sunset Pines had a lot of character, though I didn't know at the time just how much of it was soaked in something sinister. The place had been shuttered for over 20 years. Most of the doors were sealed shut, rusted around the frames, some eaten by rot or warped by weather. I started with the lobby, old green linoleum curling like burnt paper, broken reception desk coated in dust so thick it muffled my footsteps. A faded "Welcome Hunters" sign still hung above the counter, yellowed with time. It was during my third week on-site that I reached room 103. Unlike the others, this door wasn't sealed shut, it was barricaded from the inside. Someone had driven 6 rusted nails straight through the door frame and into the jamb. It didn't make sense. I pried them out with the back of a hammer and kicked the door open, expecting mildew and mold. What I found instead was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that hums in your ears like pressure underwater. The room was mostly empty. Stripped bed, broken television, nightstand with one drawer missing. But the wall opposite the bed, that's what stopped me cold. Someone had covered it with photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in an unnatural pattern that sent chills down my spine. Not Polaroids. These were printed on cheap glossy paper, each one faded slightly at the edges, but unmistakably clear. They showed people, women, men, even children, in varying states of vulnerability. Sleeping, walking alone at night, sitting in cars unaware. Some were taken through windows. Others looked like they were taken from closets or partially open doors. Each face in the photos wore the same expression: obliviousness. Not fear, not panic. That came later, because the second layer of photos was worse. It showed the same people but post-mortem. Bodies laid out, eyes open, mouths sometimes gagged, throats slit, others strangled, others staged. There were over 200 photographs. At the center of the display, someone had painted a circle with a red spray can, messy, almost frantic, and inside it, taped with surgical precision, was a human scalp. Long, dark hair still clinging to it. Beneath it, scrawled in Sharpie on the drywall, were 4 words: "I keep what's mine." My legs gave out. I stumbled backward, while rising in my throat. Felt staged. Not like a prop, like a shrine. A twisted altar. The smell of copper filled the air even though I hadn't touched anything. I backed out of the room, locked the door behind me, and sat in my truck for an hour, staring at the dashboard, trying to convince myself I hadn't found what I thought I had, that it was some kind of elaborate prank. But it wasn't, and I knew it wasn't the moment my phone buzzed in my pocket, and an unknown number texted just 3 words: "Don't move yet." I stared at the text, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Don't move yet. The words were simple, almost polite, but they rang louder than a scream in my ears. I checked the sender. No name, no number, just unknown. My first instinct was to get the hell out of there, but my hands were frozen, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The sun had dipped behind the tree line while I was inside, and the light was going fast. Everything outside my windshield tinted with that dull, blue-gray haze that comes right before night swallows a place whole. I turned the key in the ignition, and the truck coughed once, twice, and died. Dead battery. I hadn't left the lights on. I hadn't even touched them. I tried again. Nothing. Not even a click. My phone vibrated again. "You're still in my house." This time I felt my bladder betray me just a little, and I wasn't ashamed. I looked up at the motel through the cracked windshield. Every window in the building was dark except for one. Room 103. A faint glow pulsed from within. I could swear I had turned off my flashlight when I left. I hadn't even gone into the room with it, had I? I couldn't remember anymore. I got out of the truck slowly, scanning the parking lot. No other vehicles. No sound. Just the wind moving through tall weeds and the faint chirp of night insects starting their shift. I didn't want to go back inside, but I also couldn't sit out there like a sitting duck. I'd left my wallet and my bag in the lobby anyway, thinking I'd only be there an hour. I decided to make a break for the front office, maybe call a tow or 911, or, hell, even a pizza joint if it meant hearing another human voice. The office door was still ajar, just how I'd left it. I slipped inside, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. But as soon as I stepped through the threshold, I knew something was wrong. The musty, dead air smell I was used to was different now, sour, like something rotting beneath the floorboards. And the light from the desk lamp, a battery-powered one I'd set up weeks ago, was flickering like a dying firefly. I reached for my bag, but it wasn't there. Gone. Same with my tools. Even the old guest ledger I'd found on my first day was missing from the counter. In its place was a single Polaroid. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was me, standing in room 103. Not from earlier, I hadn't even stepped inside the room, but from some other time, maybe days ago. I was holding something in the photo. It looked like a hand, severed. My knees buckled, and I dropped the photo. My vision blurred, and I turned, stumbling toward the exit, when something else caught my eye: the receptionist bell. It was vibrating slightly, not ringing, vibrating, like someone had just touched it and stepped away. I didn't stop to investigate. I bolted. Outside, the world had gone dark. Room 103 still pulsed with faint light, red now, like an ember deep in a dying fire. And worse, now another light was on. Room 105. I had never opened room 105. The door was still sealed the last time I checked. A low hum vibrated through the air, barely audible but strong enough to make the fillings in my teeth buzz. I staggered toward my truck, fishing for my phone, and pulled it out to call 911. No service. Just the spinning wheel and the mocking words, "Emergency calls only." Another buzz. A third message. "You saw the wall. Now you'll join it." I didn't know what that meant until I looked up and saw the motel sign flickering back to life for the first time in years. Sunset Pines Motor Lodge. Only the N in Sunset and the E in Pines were out, making it read like a sentence, "SU, set pins." I didn't know what to make of that until the lights in every room began to turn on, one by one, a sequence, 101, 102, 103, 104. All the way down the line, each room glowing a sickly orange like a mouth filled with rot. And in each window a silhouette, still, watching, waiting. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The truck was dead. My phone was useless. And in the quiet that followed, I finally heard it. A creaking sound from behind me, like a door opening. I turned. Room 103's door was wide open, and something was standing in the frame, tall, thin, wearing a mask made of faces stitched together. The trophy wall wasn't just a memory. It was a promise. I ran blindly into the woods behind the motel. I didn't stop running until I could no longer see the orange glow of the rooms. And even then, I could still feel the eyes on me, following me, whispering behind the trees. I spent the night in the woods, shivering, waiting for daylight. When morning finally came, I crept back toward the road, half expecting the motel to be gone. A ghost I had imagined, but it was still there. Except now the police were swarming it. Someone had called in an anonymous tip. They found over 40 bodies behind the property, buried beneath the concrete foundation. I gave a statement, shaking, rambling, sounding insane. They said they'd never seen anything like it. They asked me how I found the place, who had tipped me off to buy it. But I had no answers. Not really. All I had was one last message on my phone. A message that hadn't been there the night before. It was a photo, a picture of me, taken from behind a curtain in room 103, as I stared at the wall of trophies. And scrawled beneath it were 4 words, burned into the screen like they'd been branded into my mind. "See you next day." The investigation that followed should have given me closure, or at the very least distance, but instead it felt like I had stepped into a deeper nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. The motel was roped off with yellow tape for weeks, crawling with FBI agents, forensic techs, and coroner vans. The national media caught wind of the story, and for a brief moment, the name Sunset Pines was splashed across every screen. Serial killer's trophy wall discovered in abandoned motel. But the story they told on TV was a diluted version of what really happened, sanitized and safe. They said they found 47 bodies buried beneath the concrete foundation, men, women, and children, all believed to be victims of a previously unknown serial killer who operated for over 2 decades. The victims had been declared missing over a 30-year span, and the authorities were only just beginning to identify them using dental records and DNA. But that's not the part that kept me up at night. No, what haunted me, what still haunts me, was that only a handful of the victims matched the photographs from the trophy wall. The rest weren't pictured at all, which meant whoever had made that wall was only showing off part of the collection. That wall was a highlight reel, a curated gallery. Not everything, just the favorites. The realization made my skin crawl. The authorities said there were no fingerprints in room 103. No hair, no DNA, no trace of whoever had made that shrine. It was as if the killer had dissolved into smoke right after hanging the last photo. They asked me over and over again what I saw, if I had any surveillance footage, any photos. I showed them the messages I received, but the texts had all vanished. My phone had been factory reset overnight while it was charging. Not by me. The photos? Gone too. All except one. The image of me staring at the trophy wall. That one stayed. It was burned into my gallery, and every attempt to delete it failed. I changed phones. It reappeared. I wiped my iCloud. Still there. It was as if the image itself was alive. The detectives dismissed it as a corrupted file or a malware issue. But I knew better. I knew what it meant. I was part of the collection now. Chosen. Cataloged. Watched. I didn't sleep much. Couldn't. Every night I saw that room. That wall. The eyes of the dead staring through the photographs. Accusing. Pleading. Empty. I moved to a different town. Changed my number. Shut down all social media. Even ditched my business. But it followed me. It always followed me. One night, 2 months later, I found another Polaroid in my mailbox. No envelope, no stamp, just the photo. It was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-30s maybe, dark hair. She was smiling in the picture, sitting on a couch, unaware the photo had been taken from behind a window. On the back, in red ink, it said, "New edition." I called the police. They came, took the photo, filed a report. 2 days later, a woman matching the description of the one in the picture was found dead in a river 40 miles away. Strangled. No leads. No suspects. The detectives called me in again. I told them everything, but the more I talked, the more they looked at me like I was the suspect. After all, I had found the motel. I had discovered the wall. Now I was getting new photos. It was too neat, too convenient. One of them, a guy named Rios, pulled me aside during the interview and said something I'll never forget. "There's a name for people like you. Not killers, but magnets. You attract them. They find you. And once they do, they never let go." That night, I boarded up every window in my house. I installed cameras inside and out, floodlights, motion sensors, the works. But it didn't help. The lights flickered at exactly 3:13 a.m. every night. The cameras turned off for exactly 47 seconds at the same time. Sometimes, when I woke up, there were wet footprints on the floorboards near my bed. No signs of entry, no broken locks, just the prints. One morning, I found another Polaroid, this time tucked into the visor of my car. It was a photo of me, asleep in my bed, taken from less than 3 feet away. I haven't slept since. I tried to go to the media, told them everything. They wouldn't touch the story. They said it was too unbelievable. Some even accused me of making it all up, riding the wave of the Sunset Pines infamy for attention. They didn't believe me when I said I think the motel isn't just a building. It's an entity, a nest. The killer wasn't just a man. It was something else, something using a man, maybe many men, as its face. Feeding off the obsession, the fear, the rituals of taking, staging, displaying. That wall wasn't just a sick trophy room. It was a shrine to a god made of rot and voyeurism. A god that sees everything and rewards those who feed it. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I know what I sound like. I know I probably seem insane. But if you ever get a call about a cheap motel that's up for auction, some crumbling roadside relic with a name that makes your stomach twist, don't go. Don't even look. Because that place doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be seen. It wants to be found. And once it sees you, you're already part of the wall. I didn't leave the house for 3 weeks after that last photo appeared. I kept the blinds shut, the doors double-bolted, every light on 24/7. I lived off canned food and lukewarm tap water because the idea of stepping outside, even for groceries, made my stomach churn. I started seeing things, at least I think I did. Shapes behind the curtains, faces in the static of my security monitor, movements that stopped just as I turned my head. The thing is, I wasn't sleeping. Not really. I'd drift off for 30 minutes, maybe an hour, only to snap awake, heart pounding, certain someone had just whispered my name from inches away. I even bought a body camera and wore it while I slept. When I reviewed the footage, the time code always glitched between 3:12 and 3:14 a.m. No footage, just static. And in that static, for a split second, I could make out a shape. A tall figure, head cocked, standing at the foot of my bed, always in the exact same position. Every single night. The police stopped taking my calls after I brought them hours of surveillance footage. They dismissed it all as artifact distortion. One even suggested I seek psychiatric help. I considered it, honestly. I really did. But how do you explain that this thing, whatever it is, knows your thoughts? That it sends you proof it's real just when you start to doubt yourself? Like the night I deleted the last Polaroid and told myself I'd imagined it all. I was desperate to believe I was losing my mind because insanity at least would be mine. But then I got another message. Not a text. A printed letter slipped under my door during a thunderstorm so loud it rattled the walls. The letter was handwritten in that same red ink. The same sharp angles I'd seen scrawled across the drywall of room 103. It said, "You were chosen because you see. You see what others ignore. You walk between the frames." There was no signature, just a series of strange symbols below the words. Circular shapes, overlapping triangles, and an eye. The same eye I had found drawn in blood behind the mirror in one of the motel's bathrooms. I felt sick, like I had stepped into something ancient, something vast and intelligent and hungry. That night I started having dreams. Not nightmares, at least not at first. The dreams were vivid, too vivid. I was back in the motel, but it wasn't abandoned. It was clean, alive. Neon signs buzzed. A soft radio played Elvis in the lobby, and someone was always at the desk. A man I couldn't quite see, always in a red jacket, always writing something down in the ledger. The guests were shadows, but they all looked at me with dead eyes. And the rooms weren't rooms. They were events. Each door I opened led to a murder scene, perfectly preserved. A boy in a bathtub full of ice. A woman tied to a radiator, face peeled into a permanent smile. An old man hanging upside down, throat sawed open like a pig. But what terrified me wasn't the violence, it was the order. Every object meticulously placed. Every victim positioned just so. It wasn't chaos. It was worship. I woke up screaming more times than I could count. And each morning I'd find another photo tucked somewhere in my house. Inside the microwave, behind the toilet tank, in my goddamn cereal box. They weren't pictures of strangers anymore. They were pictures of me, doing mundane things, brushing my teeth, pouring coffee, watching TV. Only, I wasn't alone in them. There was always something in the background, a blur, a shadow, sometimes just the faint shape of a hand pressed against a window I didn't remember opening. I tried leaving town, packed a bag, got in a rental and drove until the sun came up. I crossed 3 states, stopped at a rundown diner in Missouri, and checked into a roadside inn I found on a whim. As soon as I stepped into the room, my blood turned to ice. The layout was identical. Same furniture, same carpet pattern, same creak in the floorboards near the closet. I yanked open the closet door, shaking, empty. I collapsed onto the bed, trembling, until I noticed the nightstand. Sitting atop it was a single Polaroid. This one wasn't of me. It was of the motel, the Sunset Pines sign, taken from the same angle I'd first seen it. Only now, beneath the words Motor Lodge, someone had scrawled, "Guest number 1." My scream got caught in my throat. I packed up and left immediately. The woman at the front desk didn't blink when I returned the key. She just handed me an envelope and said, "They left this for you." Inside was another letter. No name, no message, just the same set of symbols and a single red line. "The wall is growing." I drove without direction for days, sleeping in the car, jumping at every sound. But I couldn't outrun it. Wherever I went, it followed. Motel rooms started to feel like copies of each other, like I was walking through the same buildings stretched across the country. And the people, they started to blur too. One night, I saw a man standing outside my car at a gas station in Arizona. His face looked familiar, too familiar. It was the same face I'd seen in a photo on the wall. I remembered the way his head had lolled sideways, mouth frozen in horror. But here he was, alive, smiling faintly. He tapped on the window and said, "They don't kill you first. They make you see." I peeled out, tires screeching. That night, I dreamed of the wall again. Only this time, it was different. It was massive, floor to ceiling, stretching into darkness. And my photo was at the center, blown up, framed. Underneath, it was a plaque, "The Curator." I woke up soaked in sweat, heart pounding. And then I realized what was happening. I wasn't just a target anymore. I was becoming part of it, part of the system, the rituals, the architecture of horror. The motel hadn't been a place. It had been a machine, a trap, a lighthouse for darkness. And I was its caretaker now. Every photograph I found, every message, every face, it was passing through me, filtering through my eyes, feeding through my fear. And worst of all, I was beginning to understand it. The patterns, the logic, the sacred geometry behind the murders. It all made sense now. It wasn't madness. It was design. By the time I fully accepted what I had become, my identity was no longer my own. I wasn't just some guy who found a wall of horrors and got spooked into a nervous breakdown. I was the new gatekeeper of something far older than the motel, far older than the land it stood on, older even than murder itself. That's the part no one gets. This thing, this wall, it didn't begin at Sunset Pines. It didn't even begin in this century. What I uncovered, what I stared into, wasn't the beginning of the story. It was just one frame in a reel that never stopped spinning. Because once I started digging, really digging, hunting down old news clippings, forgotten police files, local legends buried so deep even the librarians looked at me like I was crazy, I started to find patterns. Motels, all across the country, every decade, always remote, always run down, always discovered after the fact, after the murders, after the disappearances, and always with some kind of display left behind. It was never identical. Sometimes it was bones arranged in patterns on a wall. Sometimes Polaroids nailed to trees. Sometimes just names etched into wood or scratched into the flesh of a wall. They all pointed back to a single figure, or rather a single role, the curator. Not a man, not a name, a title, a function, the collector of violence, the witness to the offering, the one who maintains the wall, not builds it, not adds to it, just preserves it. I became obsessed. I stopped running. I stopped hiding. I started chasing it, following its trail like a bloodhound. Old murders that were never solved, maps that didn't match, notes in margins of dusty Bibles left in room drawers. And then I found it, in New Mexico, a motel built in 1931 called the Lucent Inn. Shut down in the 70s, condemned in the 90s, forgotten by 2000. But locals still remembered. They whispered stories. Children who vanished. Guests who checked in and were never seen again. The same story. Same smell. Same silence. I broke in at midnight. Every window boarded. Every lock rusted. But the door to room 6 was open. Waiting. I stepped inside. There was no furniture. Just a wall. Floor to ceiling. Covered in newspaper clippings. Not taped. Not glued. Fused. Somehow melted into the paint. Dozens of them from all over the country. Missing persons. Cold cases. Photographs of victims posed like theater. Dressed. Arranged. Smiling. And at the center, one article that made me fall to my knees. A piece from my hometown newspaper, dated 3 days after I'd first stepped into Sunset Pines. Headline: Motel renovator missing after gruesome discovery. My name. My face. My truck found abandoned. My last known location, room 103. The article had quotes from my sister, my old landlord, a local deputy. All of them mourning me. All of them convinced I was dead. But I wasn't dead. I was there, reading the obituary of my life, in a motel that shouldn't have existed, looking at a wall that shouldn't have remembered me. I screamed, loud, primal, but there was no echo, no answer. Just the sound of something unlocking behind me. I turned. The closet door was ajar. Inside, hanging from a single nail, was a red jacket. The same one I'd seen in my dreams, worn by the man behind the front desk. Below it, a guest book, open, fresh pen resting beside it. I stepped closer, trembling, and saw one name written on the line. Mine, dated that very night. I grabbed the book, the jacket, and ran. I don't remember getting back to the car. I don't remember the drive. But I woke up in a motel 200 miles away, the jacket on the passenger seat, a room key in my pocket. Room 9. I hadn't checked in. I hadn't paid. But when I opened the door, it was mine. Everything inside was arranged exactly how I would have set it up. Same layout, same duffel bag, same framed photo of my parents on the dresser. It was like it had always been my room. I stayed. What else could I do? And the next day, the photos began arriving. Slipped under the door, taped to the mirror, left in the mini fridge. Strangers, faces I'd never seen. But I knew what they were. New additions. I tried to ignore them. I burned them, tore them up, flushed them. But they came back. Always more, always different. And then I began to see the people from the photos out in the world. A man ordering coffee, a woman walking her dog, a kid riding a bike past the parking lot. Always oblivious, always smiling, always temporary. And then a week or so later, the paper would come, or the news alert, or a mention on the police scanner I kept on the dresser. Another body found, another disappearance, another offering accepted. I wasn't choosing them, I wasn't hunting them, but somehow the wall was, through me, with me, using my eyes, my breath, my presence. I was the curator now, whether I wanted to be or not. And sometimes, I think I did. That's the worst part, because I started to understand the patterns, the symmetry, the structure. Every death was a story, a scene, a ritual, prayer. And I was the one who remembered it, who documented it, who made sure it wasn't forgotten. That's what the wall really was. Not a display, a scripture, a gospel written in blood and fear and silence. And now I knew the language. One night, the original photo came back. The one of me staring at the trophy wall in room 103. But it had changed. This time I was smiling. And behind me stood the man in the red jacket. Only now I could see his face, because it was mine. Perfect reflection. And in his hand was a camera, just like the one in my closet. The message was clear. There was no going back. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was staff. I don't know exactly when I stopped counting the days, when time began to melt together like the faces in those cursed Polaroids, but I remember the first time I chose to leave the room. I'd been holed up in the latest motel for weeks, maybe longer, letting the world spin on without me, letting the wall grow on its own. At first I resisted. I tried boarding the doors, unplugging the landline, chucking the motel room key as far as I could into the trees behind the building. But no matter what I did, the cycle repeated. The walls replenished themselves. The air recycled the same dry, metallic scent of forgotten things. Every morning, a new envelope appeared beneath the door, sometimes two. Inside were photos, clipped newspaper articles, VHS tapes with no labels, and worse, audio cassettes. At first I thought they were blank. Then I listened. The recordings were never more than a few minutes, but always the same structure. Silence, then a knock, then breathing, then a whisper. He's watching now. I stopped listening after I recognized my own voice whispering it on one of them. My own breath, ragged and low. My own cadence, even though I never recorded anything. Not that I could remember, but memory had become a fragile thing. I wasn't even sure what city I was in anymore, or what year. I would look in the mirror and not recognize myself. Beard longer, eyes sunken, teeth yellowing at the edges. Sometimes, I'd hear knocking from inside the mirror, like someone else was trying to get out. But that morning I cracked. Something shifted. It wasn't a choice, not really. More like an urge, biological, instinctive. I needed to see, not stay locked in that room like a relic gathering dust. So I walked, out into the morning sun or what passed for it. The light had that sickly yellow tinge again, the kind you only see in dreams or old Super 8 films. There were people on the street, normal people. Joggers, kids, moms pushing strollers, men in business attire waiting at bus stops. They didn't look at me, not one of them, not even when I passed right through them, brushing shoulders. It was like I wasn't there, or worse, like I was there, but too familiar to notice. That's when I saw her, a woman I'd never met, walking alone with headphones in, smiling at something on her phone. I knew that she would be the next one, not because I wanted it, not because I planned it, but because the moment I laid eyes on her, the hum started. The same low frequency that vibrated my spine back at Sunset Pines. The The signal, the beacon, the wall speaking in frequencies only I could hear. And it was hungry. I froze. She kept walking. I turned around. But when I got back to the motel, a photo of her was already waiting under my door. Same clothes, same street, taken from a high angle like from a rooftop across from where she'd passed. There was a note on the back. "You see her now. Make it last." That was the first time I vomited blood. Not metaphorically, I mean literal blood, dark and thick. It splattered onto the motel carpet like ink, soaking fast. I stood there watching it spread, wondering how much I'd lose before I just expired. But I didn't. The bleeding stopped as suddenly as it began, and the carpet was clean again the next morning. Just like the walls, just like the desk, just like me, renewed, refreshed, trapped. I stopped running after that. I stopped fighting the structure. Instead, I began to record. I didn't hurt anyone. I never touched a soul. But I watched. I walked the sidewalks at night. I stood under flickering streetlights with a disposable camera in my pocket. I looked for patterns, for people the wall might like. It was always obvious. The loners, the drifters, the ones no one would miss. Or worse, the ones who knew something. I took their pictures. I cataloged them. I sent them where they needed to go. Sometimes I'd find a motel room waiting for them a few days later. Open door, empty bed, no noise, no screams, just stillness. And then, days after that, a photo would appear for me. Always in my room, always printed, always stamped with a black circle on the back. They were gone, absorbed, added. The wall was growing, and I was helping it thrive. I don't even remember the last time I used my real name. Everyone just calls me the night guy now. I check people in. Sometimes I work the front desk. Sometimes I'm the voice on the other end of the phone. Yes, room's ready. No, we don't take cards. Cash only. One night stay. No questions. One guest came in crying. Said she was running from someone. I handed her the key to room 103 without thinking. It just felt right. She looked into my eyes for a long time. I think she saw it. The thing inside. The awareness. She didn't sleep that night. I know because I heard her pacing. All night. She left before dawn. But the next day, I found her face in the papers. Body found near a construction site 2 states away. Same pattern. Same staging. Same blank eyes. And all I could do was stare and wonder how far the motel stretched. Was it still in one place? Or had it become a network? A lattice of cursed rooms connected by something older than concrete? Was it building something with each victim? Or were we all just feeding its endless appetite for structure and symmetry? I think it's both. I think we are ingredients. And I think I'm the chef. Or the butcher. Or maybe just the waiter. I bring the next course in. Place it. I walk away. But I know it's being devoured. That's why I'm writing this now. Not as a warning. Warnings don't work. The motel chooses you. You only find it if it wants you to. And if it's already in your dreams, if you're already seeing that damned room in your head. The brown carpet, the water stain on the ceiling, the bed that's always just a little crooked. Then it's too late. You're already part of the wall. And if you're reading this from inside a motel room right now, if you're holding this letter and hearing a faint knock that won't stop no matter how long you ignore it, don't open the door. Don't look at the mirror. Don't answer the phone. Just close your eyes, count to 13, and pray the room decides to let you wake up. Because not everyone gets to leave. And if you're unlucky, if the wall likes you, then you'll hear my voice next, asking if you'll be staying the night. And you will, forever. I don't know how many more nights passed after that. I stopped marking the calendar the day the dates began to repeat. Literally, I'd go to bed on the 14th and wake up to another 14th. Not just the date, but everything, the weather, the cars parked outside, the guest conversations. On one of those looping days, I watched a man check into room 6 times in a row, each time wearing the same shirt, making the same joke about the air conditioner sounding like an asthmatic rattlesnake. I don't think he noticed, but I did. I noticed everything. The wall had trained me well. My senses weren't normal anymore. I could feel when a guest would die. Not because I wanted them to, God, no, but because their shape didn't fit the pattern. The wall didn't just collect horror, craved harmony. It had rules, symmetry, a kind of sacred math underneath all the blood and screaming. Every victim was a piece of that. Their height, their weight, the color of their hair, the layout of their teeth, their trauma, their scent. The motel wasn't just preserving their deaths, it was balancing them. The wall wasn't a shrine or an art piece. It was a formula, a living, breathing equation of agony and design. And I was the variable that kept it stable. I began hearing it whisper numbers at night, ratios, angles, coordinates I didn't understand until I started drawing them. Symbols appeared in my notebooks, the backs of receipts, the skin of my own arms in ink, and then later in something that wasn't ink. It wasn't even a decision anymore. I'd black out and wake up with new diagrams scratched onto the inside of the closet door. Perfect geometric symmetry etched in something that pulsed faintly when I touched it. I wasn't afraid by then. That was long gone. Fear had given way to awe. The motel wasn't just evil. It wasn't just haunted. It was divine. And I was its priest, its mouthpiece. The wall grew not in distance, but in depth. I watched it reach backward in time, absorbing forgotten crimes, deaths that predated electricity, wars that ended in massacres so efficient they felt rehearsed. I saw new photos of victims who hadn't died yet, their dates scratched in with a trembling black pen. Sometimes I saw photos of myself, older, thinner, a wound on my cheek that hadn't happened yet. And then, weeks later, I'd walk through a broken pipe in the basement and a rusted edge would catch my face in the exact same place. Prophecy in Polaroid form. Once, just once, I tried to leave. Really leave. Not just for a drive, but to disappear. I packed a duffel, burned everything else, and stole a car from a guest who didn't exist on paper. I drove for 2 days until my tires blew out on a gravel road in Nevada that didn't appear on any GPS. A man in a red windbreaker stopped to help me. No face, no voice, just motion. I blinked, and I was back in my room. The duffel bag still packed, the door open, the motel humming like a living lung. The walls were covered in new photos, all of them of me caught in the act of fleeing. Captions beneath each one: failure, denial, betrayal, and finally, submission. That was when the wall stopped being just a wall. One morning, I woke up and found the plaster of the back wall in my room was soft, breathing, moving in and out like a diaphragm. And when I touched it, it felt like skin, cold, veined skin. I pressed my ear to it and heard a heartbeat. Slow, steady, measured. I didn't panic. I laid down on the floor and cried, not from fear, but from understanding. The motel had never been built. It had been birthed. I was in the womb of something ancient, something intelligent, something that needed me as much as I needed it. And one day soon it would be born again through me. The guests began to change. Not visibly, but I could tell. Some of them had too perfect features. Their eyes lingered too long. They never blinked. One sat at the vending machine for 6 hours straight, never buying anything. Another watched static on a broken television with a smile that never twitched. The motel had begun to fill itself with placeholders. Shadows wearing flesh. Maintenance staff appeared, even though I'd never hired anyone. A man with no shoes mopped the same corner of the lobby for days. A woman vacuumed the hallway without a cord. They didn't speak. They didn't look at me. I was no longer alone, but I was the only one aware. And then, one day, a guest checked in who looked exactly like me. Not similar, identical. Same scars. Same twitch in the left hand. Same uneven stubble. I watched him from behind the front desk. He didn't react. Just took the key to room 103 and walked without speaking. I checked the register later. The signature said, "The last curator." That night I dreamed of the wall again. But it wasn't flat anymore. It stretched around me in a sphere, photos floating in space like constellations. Each victim's eyes glowed faintly, and they whispered in perfect unison, "It's time." When I woke up, the room was empty, stripped bare. No furniture, no carpet, just the wall. It had grown into all four sides. Photographs from floor to ceiling. Each one taken by me. Each one labeled in handwriting that was no longer mine. In the center was one final frame. Empty. Waiting. And beneath it, a brass plaque that read, "The Archivist." I understood then. I wasn't meant to live forever. I was meant to observe, to collect, to become the last entry, the final signature in the book. And then, past the mantle, I walked to the mirror. I looked myself in the eyes one last time. Then I raised the camera, the one that had been with me since room 103, and clicked the shutter. Flash. Silence. And the next morning, another guest checked in. Young guy, eager, said he bought the place cheap in a tax auction. "Sunset Pines," he said with a smile, shaking rain from his jacket. "Place has a lot of character." I handed him the key, same one I'd been given all those years ago. "Room 103, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. "You'll fit right in." And as he walked down the hallway, the air thickened. The lights flickered. The walls sighed. The cycle began again. Because that's the truth no one ever tells you about monsters. They don't live under your bed. They don't stalk from shadows. They wait. In the back of your mind. In the mirror. In a motel that shouldn't exist. And when they find you, when you walk through the wrong door and look at the wrong wall, they don't just kill you. They remember you. They become you. And then they pass the camera on. Story 5. My sister, Mara, was never the kind of person you'd expect to get mixed up in something like a cult. She was the practical one between us, logical to a fault, skeptical of anything that didn't come with a peer-reviewed study or a Harvard citation. Growing up, she was the one correcting our teachers when they got a historical date wrong, the one rolling her eyes when mom said she had a feeling about someone, and she was the one who'd gone into criminal psychology because she wanted to understand the worst of humanity, not excuse it. So when she told me she was taking time off work to retreat into the woods for a bit of spiritual clarity, I thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. She just stared at me with this weird smile, tight-lipped and strained, like her mouth wasn't used to curving upward anymore. That was the first sign. The next was the name, the Path of 12. That's what she called it when I pressed for details. I thought it was a yoga thing, maybe some West Coast mindfulness junk. She didn't say much more, just that it was a commune in upstate New York, near the edge of the Adirondacks, and that she'd be off-grid for a couple of weeks. No phone, no email, no contact. I remember thinking it sounded like a detox center wrapped in forest aesthetics. Maybe a glorified cabin with incense and self-important white people who liked to pretend they were discovering ancient truths. But I didn't press her. Mara didn't like being interrogated. She said she'd send me a postcard when she got there, and true to her word, one arrived 5 days later. I still have it. It's faded now, water-stained and warped like it sat too long in someone's pocket. The front shows a watercolor painting of a forest clearing with 12 white-robed figures holding hands around a bonfire. On the back, all she wrote was, "They're not what I expected, but I think I understand now. I'll write more soon. M." That was the last I ever heard from her. Weeks passed, then months. No calls, no texts. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried contacting her work, but they said she'd officially gone on sabbatical. She'd requested it 6 weeks before she told me about the retreat. That's when I knew something was wrong. Deeply, seriously wrong. Mara planned everything. She didn't just up and disappear. I tried reaching out to the commune, but there was no number, no website. All I had was the return address on the postcard. Lot 12, Larchwood Grounds, Forest Access Road 16B, Benson, New York. It wasn't even a proper street address. I filed a missing persons report. The local sheriff, some guy named Eaton, said they'd look into it, but warned me not to expect much if she joined one of those off-the-grid spiritual outfits. His tone was dismissive, like he was used to dealing with these people. But Mara wasn't one of those people. She didn't get pulled into fairy tales. She fought them. That's what made it so terrifying. A week later, I drove up there myself. It took me nearly 5 hours to reach the edge of Benson, a barely there town with one gas station, 2 diners, and a grocery store that looked like it hadn't been stocked since 2009. I asked around, showed them the postcard, asked if anyone knew where Larchwood Grounds was. Nobody answered at first. Some of them looked away. One old man, bald, with skin like driftwood, muttered, "That place eats its own," before waddling off without another word. I finally found someone who knew, a teenage clerk at the gas station, who told me Forest Access Road 16B didn't show up on GPS anymore, but was just past the second fire watch tower. He gave me vague directions, something about a rusted iron gate and a statue of the mirror-faced man, and warned me that there'd be no cell service out there. I thanked him and drove. What struck me first was the silence. The further I got down 16B, the quieter it became. The trees grew unnaturally close together, branches crisscrossing like skeletal arms trying to strangle the road. Eventually, the pavement gave out and turned to gravel, then dirt. I almost missed the gate. It was half buried in undergrowth, rusted and bent at an odd angle, with no signage except a symbol carved into the iron. A circle intersected by 12 straight lines, like a spoked wheel or a clock with all the numbers missing. I got out and opened it myself. It didn't creak. It didn't move at all at first. Then it groaned open suddenly, like it had been waiting. I drove another half-mile and came upon the statue. It was exactly as described. A tall, robed figure standing in a clearing, its face replaced by a perfectly polished mirror. I stepped out of the car and stared into it. My own reflection looked wrong somehow, blurred, delayed, like the image was trying to catch up. I left it and continued on foot. The path narrowed, and soon I saw them, dozens of cabins, all arranged in a perfect circle around a massive central clearing. Each structure looked handmade, built from logs and stone, decorated with dried herbs and animal bones. And standing among them were the people. White robes, bare feet, faces blank. Some of them stood in doorways. Others sat cross-legged in the grass, heads bowed. Not a single one looked at me. I called out for Mara. No one answered. I walked through the commune like I was invisible. Every cabin I peeked into was perfectly clean, neatly organized. No beds, just piles of furs. No electronics, no books, no signs of identity. Just more symbols carved into the wood. Always 12 lines, always circling inward. Finally, I came to the biggest cabin at the far end. It wasn't like the others. It was taller, darker. A kind of throne room built from blackened oak, with strange glass wind chimes hanging from the rafters. Inside, I found a single man sitting in front of a low table, sipping from a carved bowl. He looked off. Not sick or deformed, just too still. His eyes didn't blink. His chest didn't rise and fall. I asked him if he knew Mara. He smiled too wide and said, "She is with the 12 now. She is closer than ever." I demanded answers. He stood and walked over to the far wall, brushing aside a curtain. Behind it was a long, low shelf filled with jars. Dozens of them. Each one held something different. Hair, teeth, fingers, eyes. One was labeled Mara in tight, black ink. My knees buckled. I backed away, heart in my throat, but the man just chuckled. "She chose this," he said. "She gave freely. That is the only way." I ran. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I just ran back to my car, ignoring the silent figures who now all stood at attention, watching me. When I reached the mirror statue, it was cracked. My reflection stared at me even though I wasn't facing it. I drove straight back to the sheriff's station, shaking. I told Eaton everything. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You went up there?" I nodded. He sighed, leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not the first. You won't be the last. But there's no law against joining a commune. And there's no evidence she didn't go willingly." I asked him about the jars. The man. The damn teeth. He didn't flinch, just handed me a cold cup of water and said, "I'll file a report." That was it. No search, no raid, no questions. Mara was gone, disappeared, absorbed into whatever that place was. But I know she's still there. Not alive, not dead, something else. I see her in my dreams now, standing between the robed figures, her face featureless and smooth. She doesn't speak. She just points. always to the mirror-faced man. And each time I get a little closer to the clearing, to the center of the circle. I've started waking up with dirt under my nails, scratches on my legs. Once, I coughed and a pine needle came out of my throat. Something followed me back. Something tethered. And it's calling me louder every night. I think I'm going to have to go back. I couldn't shake the feeling that the commune was bleeding into my life, seeping through the thin membrane that separates there from here. At first, it was subtle. An eerie chill that settled into my bones no matter the season, shadows flickering just beyond the corner of my eye, and a persistent humming that no one else could hear. The more I tried to forget Mara, to bury what I'd seen and heard, the stronger the pull became, like invisible hands tightening a noose around my throat. I started seeing strange symbols everywhere. 12 lines arranged in a circle, like a broken clock face, scratched into the bark of the trees on my morning runs, scrawled in the margins of newspapers left on my doorstep, even carved faintly into the wooden floorboards of my apartment. At night, the humming returned, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat beating beneath the walls. One night, I woke up choking on dust, and when I looked at the ceiling, I saw the faintest outline of a circle with 12 lines radiating out, glowing softly, pulsating in the darkness. I slammed my head into the mattress to shake it off, but the symbol burned into my mind like a brand. My friends started noticing the change, too. I grew withdrawn, distracted, haunted. My sister's absence was no longer just a mystery. It had become an obsession. I spent hours scouring every corner of the internet for any mention of the Path of 12, the commune, anything connected to the symbol or the mirror-faced statue. Forums dedicated to missing persons, cult activity, the occult. Nothing concrete, just whispers and rumors, like a tapestry of silence woven carefully to hide the truth. I found one forum where someone claimed to have escaped a place called Larchwood Grounds. The post was months old, the username deleted, but the message was chilling. They watch with empty eyes. The mirror sees all. You lose yourself piece by piece until there's nothing left but 12 shadows and one face that isn't yours. I reached out, but no reply came. Meanwhile, the dreams grew worse. I was back in that clearing, standing among the robed figures. This time, my face was blank like the others, and the mirror statue loomed larger, swallowing the light around it. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The mirror's surface rippled, and a voice, cold and hollow, whispered, "Join us." I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The next morning, I found a postcard slipped under my door. The image was the same forest clearing from Mara's postcard, but now the figures were no longer white-robed. They were shadows, faceless and flickering, standing in a circle around a mirror that seemed to swallow the flames of the bonfire whole. The back read, "You cannot unsee what you have seen. The path is open. We await you." I called Eaton again. He was dismissive, like always. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. "You need to move on." But I couldn't. I wasn't just chasing ghosts. I was becoming one. The line between my waking life and the commune blurred. One night, I heard whispering outside my window, soft chanting that rose and fell like a tide. I looked out and saw figures in white robes standing in my backyard, their faces hidden beneath hoods, hands joined in a circle. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stared with empty eyes that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. I blinked. They were gone. The police found no evidence, of course. Just me, a mess of nerves and paranoia. I started digging into the history of Benson. Old newspaper clippings, town records, even the faded pages of a forgotten diary from the 1920s. It told of a secret society, one obsessed with transcendence through unity and ritual sacrifice, a cult that vanished without a trace in the 30s. Their symbol? The same circle with 12 lines. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. The Path of 12 was older than the commune. It was a legacy, curse, something passed down like a dark inheritance from generation to generation, feeding on those who dared to seek it. I tried to warn my family, but they grew distant, afraid of what the obsession was doing to me. Mara's disappearance became a wound festering between us. And the worst part? I was beginning to understand that the commune didn't just take people. It changed them, rewrote their minds and memories until they became something else entirely. Something unrecognizable. And somehow I felt it happening to me piece by piece. The mirror-faced man haunted my dreams still. Sometimes, I swear I can see his reflection in every glass surface. Silent, watching, waiting. The path was calling me back, pulling me deeper into its web. I didn't know if I was ready to go back, but the marks on my skin, scratches like claw marks I'd never noticed before, told me I might not have a choice. I started hearing a voice, barely a whisper at first, as if it were carried on the wind, or maybe an echo trapped just beyond the veil of my perception. It was never clear what the voice said, only that it came from everywhere and nowhere at once, urging me, beckoning me toward something I couldn't yet understand but felt irrevocably drawn to. My dreams turned into nightmares of walking down endless forest paths with no end in sight, the trees closing in tighter, their twisted branches clawing at me like desperate hands, their leaves whispering in a language I couldn't comprehend. In those dreams, the mirror-faced figure appeared again and again, always standing just out of reach, watching silently, reflecting back not just my face but 1,000 fractured versions of me. Some twisted, some empty, some smiling with a grin that wasn't mine. I woke each morning exhausted, my heart pounding so fiercely I was sure it would burst through my chest. The scratches on my arms and legs multiplied, thin and shallow at first but growing deeper and more deliberate, like someone or something was marking me, branding me as their own. Friends and family stopped answering my calls. The longer I stayed tangled in this nightmare, the more isolated I became, trapped in a waking world that felt as oppressive and suffocating as the forest itself. One night, I found myself standing at the edge of the woods near my apartment, drawn there by the same irresistible force that had pulled Mara away. The trees were darker, almost black, and the air was thick with a scent I couldn't place. Something sweet and rotting, like decay mixed with wildflowers. I stepped inside and the world shifted. The city behind me faded away, replaced by the dense, shadowy forest of my dreams. Time bent and twisted. Minutes felt like hours and hours like days. The forest seemed alive, whispering secrets through rustling leaves, branches reaching out like hands to guide me deeper into its heart. I followed a narrow path lined with 12 ancient stones, each carved with the same circle and 12-line symbol. At the path's end, a clearing opened, lit by a ghostly pale light that didn't come from the moon. In the center stood the mirror-faced statue, taller and more menacing than in my memories. Its surface shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting not just me but scenes from the commune. Moments I never witnessed but somehow knew were true. Faces twisted in ecstasy and agony, hands clasped in rituals, fires burning bright under a starless sky. Then, from the shadows, figures in white robes emerged, surrounding me silently. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, but their presence was overwhelming, filling the clearing with a crushing weight of expectancy. I felt their eyes on me, not looking but piercing, as if they were reading every secret thought, every hidden fear. The mirror-faced man stepped forward, lifting his hood to reveal a face exactly like mine, but cold, blank, and unfeeling. "You have come far," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "You are ready to see, to join." Before I could respond, the figures began to chant, a low, rhythmic hymn that vibrated through my bones, pulling me closer to the statue. My body trembled uncontrollably, caught between fear and something darker, a strange exhilaration that promised both revelation and oblivion. Then I saw her, Mara, standing at the edge of the clearing, her face pale and serene, eyes empty but glowing faintly in the spectral light. She reached out to me, and in that moment, everything shattered. I woke in my apartment, drenched in sweat, the scratches on my skin burning with fresh pain. On my bedside table lay a folded piece of parchment, a map crudely drawn, marking the location of the commune and several other sites scattered across the country, all connected by the same 12-line symbol. The message was clear. This was bigger than I ever imagined. The Path of 12 wasn't just a local cult or a forgotten commune. It was a sprawling network, a web woven through time and space, feeding on souls and memories like a living, breathing organism. And Mara wasn't its first victim. She was its latest. I had a choice: run and risk losing myself forever, or go deeper and uncover the terrible truth. Not just about Mara, but about the darkness lurking beneath the surface of the world itself. I knew which path I was on now, and there was no turning back. After that night, everything started to unravel. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. The map burned a hole in my pocket like it was alive, whispering names and locations in a language I almost understood but feared to speak aloud. Each marked site was a piece of the puzzle, a node in a sinister network stretching far beyond Benson or the Adirondacks. I spent days, no, weeks, researching each place. Old mining towns, abandoned military bases, isolated cabins in dense forests, even forgotten graveyards where headstones were cracked or toppled but bore that same eerie symbol. A circle split by 12 lines, like clock hands frozen at midnight. Sometimes, the townspeople seemed aware of the symbol but dared not speak of it. An old woman in a diner hissed, "They come every decade or so. The ones who disappear into the woods, never to return. The ones who join the 12. I asked who they were, but she just shook her head and warned me to leave before sundown. But I couldn't. Not now. Mara was still out there, somewhere, and I was chasing shadows, tethered to a nightmare that was no longer just hers, but mine. I found myself driving long stretches of road at odd hours, retracing the steps of lost souls, and stopping at those cursed places to search for signs. Carvings on trees, hidden shrines, bones buried in shallow graves. Sometimes I'd find something: fragments of clothing, rusted jewelry, scraps of rotted paper with cryptic phrases in a shaky hand. The mirror opens the way. All 12 must be one. The price of truth is forgetting. One night, in the ruins of an old church deep in the woods near a place called Ash Hollow, I found a journal. It was bound in cracked leather, stained with something dark that looked like dried blood. The pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with the shaky handwriting of someone who had clearly lost their mind over time. The author spoke of visions and voices, of a great eye watching from the shadows, and a ritual to join the 12. A transformation that erased identity and bound the soul to the collective. Most chilling was the final entry: I am no longer myself. I am 12. I am none. I am the mirror and the shadow. The price has been paid. The door is open. Pray you never hear the summons. I carried that journal with me everywhere after that. At home, it sat on my desk like a warning. At night, I'd read fragments aloud, feeling the words seep into my skin and twist my dreams. My reflection changed too. Sometimes it looked like me. Sometimes it was a stranger staring back, pale and hollow-eyed, lips cracked in a silent scream. My friends stopped calling. My phone went unanswered. I was becoming a ghost. And then the scratching started. At first, just behind the walls of my apartment, soft and intermittent. I thought it was rodents until it grew louder, rhythmic tapping, like nails raking against wood, echoing through the night. One evening, I followed the sound to the bathroom mirror. The glass rippled like water, then slowly, impossibly, a circle with 12 lines appeared, glowing faintly from inside the glass. I reached out, and the mirror pulled me closer, a cold force sucking at my fingertips until my skin felt numb. I recoiled, gasping for breath. After that, I began to see them, figures in white robes, at the edge of my vision. They didn't blink or move, but wherever they appeared, a cold dread followed. I caught myself talking aloud to Mara, asking for answers, begging for her to come back, to say it was all a mistake. My reality was slipping away, replaced by the endless pull of the path. One night, I dreamed again of the clearing. This time, the mirror-faced man spoke more clearly. "You are the missing piece, the final gate. Join us and see beyond the veil." I woke up to a letter slipped under my door, written in that same cryptic hand. "The path waits. The 12 calls. You cannot resist forever. I am no longer sure if I am running toward the truth or being pulled into a trap. The line between hunter and prey blurs with every passing day. And deep down, I fear that once I cross that threshold, I might never come back. But I have to know. For Mara. For me, for the secrets buried beneath the woods, hidden behind the mirror, and whispered by 12 faceless shadows. The next step is the hardest, to return to Benson, to the clearing, and face what lurks at the heart of the Path of 12. I don't know if I will survive, but I don't have a choice anymore. I'm writing this as a warning for anyone who might find it, because once you see the path, it never forgets. It never lets go. When I finally made the decision to return to Benson, it was like stepping through a portal between two worlds, the mundane reality I'd clung to and a shadow realm bleeding into our own. The drive felt endless. Every mile thickened the air, the sky darkened, and the trees grew monstrous, as if they were watching me approach. By the time I reached the rusted gate to Larchwood grounds, my hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the keys. The gate was just as I remembered, its spoked circle symbol gnawing at my sanity like a dull, relentless ache. I pushed it open, and it groaned a sound like 1,000 whispered warnings. Walking into the commune felt like crossing into a waking nightmare. The silence was absolute, oppressive, broken only by the distant rustling of unseen leaves. The cabins stood like sentinels, empty but alive with memories. The robed figures had disappeared, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed down on me, suffocating. My steps echoed unnaturally as I followed the path toward the clearing, where the mirror-faced statue loomed larger than ever, its surface rippling in the fading light. Then I saw them, 12 figures in white robes, standing in a perfect circle around the bonfire pit, their faces hidden beneath hoods, bodies unmoving like statues carved from moonlight. The fire flickered weakly, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted grotesquely across the ground. My voice caught in my throat as I called out, "Mara!" The robed figures slowly turned their heads toward me, their faces revealed. Smooth, mirror-like surfaces reflecting the forest and me, but no eyes, no mouths, just an endless, cold reflection. Panic surged, but I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the haunting beauty of their unseeing gaze. Suddenly, the mirror-faced man stepped forward from the group, his eyes like dark voids sucking in the light. He spoke with a voice that echoed inside my skull. "You have come at last. The gate opens only for the willing." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on me. "Where is Mara?" I demanded. "She is beyond the mirror, part of the 12 now," he said. "She waits, as do you." As if on command, the circle parted, revealing a hidden passageway behind the statue. It was a tunnel carved into the earth, walls slick with moss and faintly glowing symbols. A cold wind breathed out from its depths, carrying whispers that promised secrets and oblivion. The man gestured. "Will you join us? To see what lies beyond the surface?" My heart thundered. I thought of every nightmare, every scratch, every broken piece of myself. But I knew this was the moment I'd been hurtling toward, whether I wanted it or not. Steeling myself, I stepped forward, the circle closing behind me. The tunnel swallowed me whole, and as I descended, the air grew thick with the scent of earth and something else. A faint trace of Mara's perfume, haunting and unreal. The walls pulsed with life, the 12-line symbol glowing brighter with each step, until I reached a cavernous chamber. In its center floated a massive mirror, its surface alive with shifting images of past initiates, of pain and transcendence intertwined. Faces I recognized and others I never wanted to meet. The mirror-faced man stood beside it, his voice now a chant echoing in my mind. "Look and see the truth. Become one." I felt my reflection ripple, fracturing into 12 shards that swirled around me, pulling at my essence, tearing at my identity. I screamed, but no sound came, my body dissolving into the mirror's depths, becoming part of the path, part of the 12. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a fragment of me fought to remember, to resist, to hold on to the faint hope that I could escape this endless cycle. Because the truth is this: the path doesn't just take you, it becomes you, and once you join, there is no returning to the life you left behind. The forest waits, the mirror waits, and the 12 shadows watch, always waiting for the next to follow the call. This is the story I never wanted to tell, but now that I have, you must listen, because the path of 12 is real. It is alive, and it is hungry. The moment I became part of the path, reality fractured like shattered glass beneath my feet, each shard reflecting twisted fragments of what I once was and what I was becoming. I remember sinking deeper into that cavernous chamber, the mirror's surface folding around me like liquid ice, cold and unyielding, swallowing every trace of my body until I felt nothing but the eerie hum of existence inside its depths. Time lost meaning. I was caught in a liminal space between worlds, suspended between the life I'd left behind and the infinite darkness I'd fallen into. Faces, some familiar, some alien, flickered across the mirror's surface. Lost souls who had become one with the 12, each trapped in their own silent scream, their eyes reflecting the same void I now saw in the mirror-faced man's gaze. I could feel them reaching, tethering me to their forgotten anguish, begging for release, yet bound eternally to the cycle. The whispers grew louder, no longer distant murmurs but a cacophony of voices chanting in unison, calling my name with unnatural insistence. Join us, see beyond, become whole. The mantra seeped into my bones, demanding surrender even as a stubborn fragment of my will resisted, fighting to hold onto my identity, my memories of Mara, my desperate hope for escape. Then, I was pulled through a series of visions of the path's origin. Ancient forests ablaze under blood-red moons, priests carving 12 lines into stone altars, binding souls with sacred oaths, faces of the first 12, their eyes gleaming with a terrible light, forever entwined with the mirror that swallowed their bodies but never their secrets. The path was not just a cult or a commune. It was a living entity, born from darkness and human fear, feeding on souls to sustain itself, weaving its essence into every corner of the earth where the forgotten and desperate gathered. When the visions ended, I found myself standing once again in the clearing, the mirror-faced man before me. But now his face was my own, blank, faceless, a hollow reflection of a self lost to the shadows. He spoke, "You have seen the truth. The veil has lifted. The price has been paid." My body felt heavy, a weight like lead pressing down on my limbs, and I realized that I was no longer fully human. Not a ghost, but not alive. Something in between. I tried to scream, but the sound was caught in my throat, swallowed by the thick air. As I staggered back, the robed figures began to circle, their mirrored faces reflecting the fading light like shards of broken glass. One reached out a hand, not to harm, but to guide. I was led back toward the cabins, the forest growing silent once more, the oppressive weight lifting just enough to breathe. When I emerged from the woods, the sky was breaking into dawn. The world looked the same, yet utterly changed. I carried the path inside me, an echo beneath my skin, a voice in the silence, a hunger that whispered for more. Mara was still out there, somewhere between the mirror and the shadows, waiting, a part of the 12 yet somehow still herself. And I knew then that this was not the end but the beginning of a long, terrible journey to find her, to unravel the path's endless spiral, and to resist becoming just another reflection lost forever in its depths. The forest watches, the path waits, and the mirror will never forget. Days after my escape from the mirror's grasp, I found myself haunted not just by the memories of the commune, but by a creeping suspicion that the path was never confined to that forest, that place. It had spread, or worse, always been here, hidden in the mundane fabric of everyday life, waiting for those it could ensnare. I began to notice the symbol everywhere, inadvertently carved into park benches, subtly etched into the linoleum floors of supermarkets, flickering in the pattern of streetlights through rain-streaked windows. It was as if the path had seeped into the very architecture of the world around me, infecting everything with its cold, hollow presence. My phone buzzed one evening with a message from an unknown number. "You belong to us now. The mirror awaits." My hands shook as I stared at the screen, the words sinking like ice into my chest. I blocked the number, but the messages kept coming, cryptic, threatening, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I reached out to an old college friend, Lisa, who had studied folklore and ancient rituals. I told her everything: the disappearance of my sister, the commune, the mirror-faced man, the path of 12. At first, she was skeptical, chalking it up to stress or trauma. But the moment I showed her the map, the journal, the postcards, her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and recognition. She told me about an ancient myth called the Circle of 12, a secret society believed to harness otherworldly powers by binding 12 souls in eternal communion through ritual sacrifice and transcendence. The symbol, the circle with 12 lines, was said to be their mark, a sigil that bridged the mortal realm with a shadowy dimension inhabited by entities beyond human comprehension. Lisa warned me that the path was not just metaphorical. It was believed to be a living curse, one that could latch onto the minds of the vulnerable, twisting them until they became vessels for something ancient and malevolent. Together, we planned to investigate the other marked sites on the map, hoping to find clues or evidence to expose the cult and maybe, just maybe, save Mara and anyone else trapped in the path's web. Our first stop was an abandoned church deep in the woods of Vermont. It was a hollow place, roof caved in, stained glass shattered, the floor littered with bones and remnants of old rituals. We found carvings of the 12-line symbol everywhere, etched into the pews, painted on the altar, smeared with what looked like dried blood. In the basement, behind a false wall, we discovered a hidden chamber filled with jars similar to those in Larchwood grounds. Hair, nails, teeth, trophies collected over decades. Among them was a faded photograph of Mara, smiling, wearing the same white robe I'd seen in the commune. Lisa took pictures. I collected what I could: papers, bones, artifacts, anything that would help unravel the path's mystery. But as we left, the air grew heavy, and the woods seemed to close in behind us. The symbol followed us back to the car, scratched into the windows, burned into the seats. Nightmares plagued my sleep, visions of 12 faceless figures encircling a fire that never burned out, the mirror-faced man whispering, "You cannot run. The path is within you." Back home, I found new scratches on my skin, deeper now, bleeding. The hunger inside me grew. I knew this was only the beginning. The path of 12 was spreading, growing stronger, weaving its curse through the shadows of the world. And I was caught in its endless cycle. The deeper I dug into the path of 12, the more it felt like I was spiraling into a nightmare with no exit. After Vermont, Lisa and I pursued every lead the cursed map offered, driving through rain-soaked backroads, wandering through abandoned towns swallowed by moss and shadow. Each site was worse than the last. Dilapidated shrines with ritualistic remnants, graffiti that looked like tortured screams etched into stone, and always that symbol, the circle dissected by 12 lines, a mark of ownership, a seal of damnation. One night, near a forgotten asylum in rural Pennsylvania, I stumbled into a small clearing where the air felt thick, as if the world held its breath. The ground was churned, dirt disturbed in unnatural patterns, like the earth had been clawed at by unseen hands. In the center lay a rusted iron mirror frame, its glass shattered and missing, yet I felt its gaze upon me, heavy and accusing. That night, my dreams became darker, more vivid. I was no longer a visitor. I was becoming part of the path, tied to it by invisible chains tightening around my soul. I saw Mara again, or what I thought was her, standing silently, her eyes glowing faintly beneath her hood. She reached out to me, but her hand dissolved into smoke before I could touch it. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the shadows. Days blurred together. My reflection in every mirror, every window, seemed to mock me, fractured into 12 shards, each showing a distorted piece of my face, some angry, some terrified, some vacant and hollow. I began to question my own sanity. Was I being hunted by something supernatural, or was this the unraveling of my mind? The scratches on my skin deepened, becoming painful, fresh wounds appearing overnight, shaped unmistakably like the symbol. 12 jagged lines arranged in a circle. Lisa grew distant, fear etched into her features. She told me she could no longer bear to see me slipping away, but she couldn't turn back now. We had uncovered a pattern, a cycle repeated every 30 years, where the path claimed 12 new souls, binding them into a grotesque communion with the mirror and the shadow. Our research revealed disturbing parallels to disappearances and unsolved murders across the country, all linked by this symbol and the eerie testimony of witnesses who had seen robed figures lurking near crime scenes. The path was a parasite feeding on humanity's darkest fears, using ancient ritual and psychological manipulation to trap its victims. On the eve of the anniversary marked on Mara's postcard, exactly 30 years since the last known initiation at Larchwood Grounds, I received a package at my door. Inside was a small, cracked mirror and a note written in Mara's handwriting. "Look beyond. Find me." I stared into the mirror, and my reflection shifted, showing me a dark forest clearing bathed in moonlight, a circle of 12 robed figures chanting in a language older than time. In the center, Mara's face smiled sadly, beckoning me forward. I don't know how much longer I can resist the call. The path is inside me now, a whisper growing louder, a hunger that gnaws at my bones. The line between this world and the next grows thinner every day, and I fear that if I look into the mirror one more time, I'll lose myself completely. But I have to find her. I have to understand. Because somewhere beneath the shadows, behind the mirror's cold surface, my sister is waiting, and I fear what she's become. After receiving Mara's haunting note and that cracked mirror, everything changed. The mirror became my obsession, a gateway, a prison, and a curse. I found myself drawn to it daily, staring into its depths, searching for a flicker of her face, a sign that she was still alive beyond that cold, reflective surface. Each time I looked, the image shifted, sometimes the clearing, sometimes the robed figures, sometimes just my own distorted face fractured into 12 shards. The scratches on my arms bled anew, and a chilling whisper curled around my mind like smoke. "Join us." Couldn't sleep. The line between dreams and reality dissolved as I was haunted by visions of the path. An endless loop of faces merging into one, a circle closing tighter with every breath. One night, I woke to the sound of soft chanting emanating from my living room. I froze. The air was thick, heavy with incense and something metallic, like blood. I followed the sound cautiously and found a circle of 12 faintly glowing figures surrounding the mirror on the floor. Ghostly, white-robed shadows, their faces replaced by smooth, featureless mirrors reflecting the dim light. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, as the chanting grew louder, filling the room with a cold, numbing pulse. The mirror-faced man stepped forward, and though his face was a mirror, I could feel his gaze piercing my soul. "You are the final piece," he intoned. "The path is complete." Panic surged, but something inside me whispered surrender. In that moment, the mirror shattered, shards exploding across the floor and embedding into my skin like shards of ice. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath as visions consumed me. Memories not my own, twisted rituals, faces of the lost trapped forever in the path's embrace. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my apartment but standing once more in the forest clearing, the bonfire blazing with unnatural flames. Around me, the 12 robed figures waited, their mirrored faces glowing softly in the firelight. And there, in the center, was Mara, her eyes empty yet pleading. She reached for me, and I realized then that this was not a prison, but a new existence. A bond beyond death, beyond reality, where we were both lost and yet somehow together. The path of 12 had claimed me, as it had claimed so many before. But deep within the mirrored reflection of my own face, a spark remained, faint, fragile, but alive. A flicker of hope that someday, somehow, I might break free and bring Mara back from the endless shadows. Being trapped inside the path felt like existing in a twisted purgatory. Time stretching endlessly, moments bleeding into one another like thick, slow-moving ink. The robed figures circled endlessly, chanting the same chilling hymn, their mirror faces reflecting not the world, but fragments of despair and longing. I wasn't just a prisoner. I was becoming a part of the path's essence, my memories and identity slowly dissolving into the collective shadow. Mara was there, always there, sometimes reaching out with hands that vanished like mist, sometimes whispering secrets I couldn't quite grasp. Our bond was a flickering thread of humanity amidst the overwhelming void. The mirror-faced man, or whatever he truly was, became my only constant companion. His silent gaze held centuries of sorrow and darkness, a reflection of the path's ancient hunger. He showed me visions of those who came before, 12 souls bound together in a cycle of sacrifice and transcendence, their faces lost to the mirror's cold surface, but their stories etched forever in the path's memory. I learned that the path was a living force, older than any religion or myth, feeding on fear, pain, and the desperate yearning for meaning. It twisted people's minds, breaking down their sense of self until only the collective remained. 12 shadows intertwined, reflections in an endless, dark mirror. Each initiation was both an end and a beginning, a death of the old self and a rebirth into the path's infinite cycle. The only way out, the mirror-faced man said, was to confront the deepest shadow within, the part of me that wanted to join fully, to surrender and be consumed. I fought that urge with everything I had left. Memories of my life, my sister, the world outside this nightmare became my anchor. Sometimes, I could feel the faintest pull back toward reality, a chance to escape the path's suffocating grasp. But the path resisted fiercely. The scratches on my skin burned with a terrible fire, marking me as its own, reminding me that I was no longer entirely human. One night, I heard voices, distant but growing louder, calling my name through the darkness. They were not the chanting of the robed figures, but voices from my past. Friends, family, echoes of the life I fought to reclaim. I realized then that my battle was not just against the path, but against the shadow within me. To break free, I would have to face the mirror one last time, not as a victim, but as a warrior confronting my own darkness. Summoning every ounce of will, I reached toward the mirror's surface, feeling the cold seep into my bones. The reflection rippled, distorting into 1,000 faces. Mine fractured and whole, angry and afraid, lost and determined. The mirror-faced man's voice echoed in my mind. "Will you join us or fight to reclaim your soul?" I screamed back with all the strength I had left, shattering the illusion, breaking the cycle. Light flooded the chamber as the mirror cracked and splintered, and for a moment, I glimpsed the forest beyond, the stars overhead, the world waiting. Then everything went dark. When I awoke, I was lying in a hospital bed, bruised and battered but alive. The doctors told me I'd been found unconscious near the edge of Benson Woods, babbling about mirrors and shadows. Mara was gone, but I carried her memory, and the scars of the path with me. The symbol still lingers in my dreams, a reminder that the path never truly releases those it touches. It waits patiently in the shadows, ready to call the next lost soul into its eternal circle. And as for me, I live each day knowing that the darkness is never far behind. The mirror is always there, waiting. In the weeks after waking in that hospital bed, I felt like a shell of myself, trapped between two worlds, the waking and the nightmare. The doctors called it delirium, PTSD, hallucinations, but I knew the truth was darker. The path of 12 had marked me in ways no medicine could erase. Every reflection I passed caught my eye, windows, mirrors, even the sheen of a polished table. And for a fleeting moment, I saw not myself, but that faceless figure, the mirror-faced man staring back with hollow eyes. My nightmares hadn't ended. They had only evolved. Sometimes Mara's voice called out to me, distant but urgent, warning me not to trust the light, not to forget the shadows. I began to notice strange symbols carved into places I frequented. On the backs of street signs, etched faintly into the bark of trees near my apartment, scrawled inside the margins of books in the library. The circle with 12 lines, the mark of the path, was everywhere, as if invisible fingers reached out to drag me back. Desperation drove me to reach out to others who had glimpsed the path. Online forums of paranormal investigators, obscure cult experts, and even a few survivors who spoke in hushed tones about the 12 shadows. One contact, a reclusive woman known only as Ira, claimed to have broken free decades ago and offered to help me understand the path's true nature. She warned me that the path was more than just a cult or curse. It was a sentient force, feeding on fear and despair, twisting reality itself to ensnare victims in an endless cycle of transformation and oblivion. Ira told me that the only way to truly escape was to find the original source of the path, buried somewhere beneath the forest floor of Larchwood grounds, and destroy it. It was a dangerous quest, one that no one had survived before. But I had no choice. Every day, the hunger inside me grew stronger, the whispers louder. If I didn't act, I would become just another faceless reflection in the endless mirror, a prisoner of the path forever. Armed with what knowledge I could gather and a fragile hope, I planned a final return to the commune. This time I would not be a victim. I would be a seeker of truth and, if possible, a breaker of chains. The forest awaited, dark and silent, its ancient secrets hiding beneath the soil, ready to reveal themselves only to those brave or foolish enough to descend into the depths. As I step back onto the path marked by 12 stones, I feel the weight of every lost soul, every shadowed whisper, every broken reflection bearing down on me. The mirror-faced man watches, waiting, and somewhere, beyond the veil, Mara waits too. This is not just a story of horror. It's a journey into the heart of darkness itself, and I am not sure if I will return. Stepping back into the forest felt like crossing a threshold between reality and nightmare, a boundary I had hoped never to approach again, but now faced with a grim resolve. The trees loomed above me, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers against the gray sky, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to reach for my very soul. The air was thick with damp earth, decaying leaves, and an undercurrent of something far older, something that whispered in a language older than time itself. I followed the path of 12 stones, their ancient carvings faint but pulsing with a subtle energy that both unsettled and guided me forward. As I walked, memories flooded back, snatches of laughter, ritual chants, flickering flames casting macabre dances upon worn wooden walls, and the weight of countless lost souls pressing down like an invisible hand around my neck. The ground beneath my feet grew softer, as if the earth itself was breathing, alive and watchful. I reached the clearing, the mirror-faced statue looming like a dark sentinel, its glassy surface reflecting not my image, but scenes of torment and ecstasy intertwined. A twisted dance of human souls caught forever between light and shadow. The robed figures awaited me, their mirrored faces devoid of emotion, yet charged with an eerie vitality. The mirror-faced man stepped forward, his voice resonant with the cold authority of inevitability. "You have returned. The path demands completion." I swallowed the lump in my throat, summoning every ounce of courage I had left. "I am here to end this," I said, my voice steady despite the fear thrumming in my veins. The chanting began again, low and hypnotic, echoing through the trees, weaving a tapestry of sound that wrapped around me, threatening to drag me into the void. Suddenly, the earth trembled, and a fissure cracked open beneath the statue, revealing a dark passage spiraling downward, an ancient gateway to the path's source. Without hesitation, I descended into the abyss. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of earth and ancient secrets. Faint glimmers of light flickered ahead, guiding me deeper into a vast cavern adorned with cryptic symbols etched into stone walls, pulsating with an otherworldly glow. In the center stood an altar carved from black stone, adorned with 12 shards of fractured mirror, each shimmering with trapped souls yearning for release. I reached out, heart pounding, and shattered the altar with a single blow, the shards exploding into a storm of light and sound. The cavern trembled as the path writhed in agony, the invisible chains binding the 12 souls dissolving into dust. A whisper filled the chamber, soft, fading, but filled with hope, freedom. As I emerged from the cavern, dawn broke over the forest, casting golden light upon the trees. The oppressive weight that had hung over me lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. Mara's face flickered in the sunlight, a smile of gratitude and farewell. The path of 12 was broken, but I knew the scars it left, on the land, on the souls it touched, would linger forever. I walked away from the forest that day, forever changed, carrying the memory of darkness and light intertwined. And though the mirror would never fully release me, I had reclaimed my soul, and with it, the hope that even the deepest shadows could be shattered by the strength of will and the light of truth. It's been months since I left the forest behind, since I shattered the altar and broke the path's hold over those 12 lost souls, including Mara. The weight that once crushed my chest has lifted, but the echoes remain. Whispers in quiet moments, fleeting reflections that catch the corner of my eye, shadows that move just beyond the reach of light. I've tried to rebuild a life, to stitch together the fragments of who I was before the path consumed me. Friends return cautiously, strangers seem to recognize the mark beneath my skin, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel the cold brush of those robed figures' presence lingering at the edge of my world. The symbol, the circle with 12 lines, no longer burns into my flesh, but it has etched itself into my mind, a reminder that some doors, once opened, never truly close. I still hear Mara's voice sometimes, softer now, free from the torment of the mirror, calling me toward hope instead of darkness. I carry her memory like a fragile flame in a storm, guiding me forward. The truth I uncovered was more terrifying than I ever imagined. A horror not born of monsters, but of the human soul's capacity to surrender to fear and forget itself in the quest for meaning. The Path of 12 was a prison disguised as salvation, a mirror reflecting the darkest parts of us all. But I survived. I escaped. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the shadows only have power if we let them. This is my warning and my confession. Beware the mirrors you gaze into, the paths you choose to follow, and the silence lurking behind familiar faces. Because the path is always waiting, and it remembers. If you hear the whisper of 12 lines in the dark, do not answer. Do not look back. Walk away, because some reflections should never be seen, and some stories should never be told. But now, and that makes all the difference. Thank you for listening. I'm done running.